1,100-pound Kodiak bear mauls, 5 hunters, October 21st, 2024. The morning mist clung to the peaks of the Kodiak National Wildlife Refuge like ghostly fingers, reluctant to release their grip on the ancient volcanic slopes that had witnessed countless life and death struggles over millennia. At 5:47 a.m. on October 21st, 2024, the temperature hovered at 38 degrees Fahrenheit, with a light northeastern wind carrying the salt-tinged scent of the nearby Pacific Ocean across the tundra. Weather station KTWG at Kodiak Regional Airport recorded visibility at 2 miles, with intermittent fog banks rolling across the 1.9 million-acre wilderness that served as home to the world's largest concentration of brown bears. Jason Marcus Miller, 44 years old, stood at the edge of their base camp on Terra Lake's southern shore, methodically checking his Winchester Model 70 Safari Express, chambered in .375 H&H Magnum for the 5th time that morning. His weathered hands, scarred from 30 years of construction work in Anchorage, moved with the practiced precision of a man who understood that attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death in this unforgiving landscape. Jason had been planning this hunt for 3 years, saving every spare dollar from his contracting business to afford the $12,000 guided brown bear hunt that promised to be the adventure of a lifetime. At 6 feet 2 inches and weighing 215 pounds, Jason possessed the rugged build of a man accustomed to physical labor. But even his considerable strength seemed insignificant against the backdrop of Kodiak's immense wilderness. His hunting partner and best friend since high school, Kevin Dale Holt, 38, emerged from their shared Hilleberg Chiron 4 GT tent, steam rising from his breath in the frigid morning air. Kevin, a master electrician from Fairbanks, stood 5 feet 10 inches tall with the lean, wiry build of a long-distance runner. His sandy brown hair was already showing streaks of premature grey, a testament to the stress of running his own electrical contracting company while raising 3 young children with his wife Sarah. Kevin had initially been reluctant to join the expedition, concerned about the cost and time away from his family, but Jason's persistent enthusiasm had eventually worn down his resistance. Now, as he surveyed the pristine wilderness surrounding their camp, Kevin felt a mixture of anticipation and unease that he couldn't quite shake. The third member of their party, Marcus Antonio Rodriguez, 29, was already breaking down his camping gear with military efficiency. A former Marine Corps sniper who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, Marcus brought a level of tactical awareness and firearms expertise that the others respected and relied upon. At 5 feet 8 inches and 180 pounds, Marcus maintained the compact, powerful build that had served him well during his military service. His dark eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, a habit ingrained through years of combat deployment where complacency could prove fatal. Marcus worked as a firearms instructor at a shooting range in Anchorage and had jumped at the chance to hunt Kodiak brown bears when Jason extended the invitation 6 months earlier. Their professional guide, Thomas William "Tom" Erickson, 52, was already preparing the morning's route when the hunters began stirring. Tom had been guiding on Kodiak Island for 23 years, accumulating over 2 decades of intimate knowledge about the island's bear population, terrain, and weather patterns. Standing 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighing 240 pounds, Tom possessed the imposing physical presence necessary to command respect in the wilderness. His full beard, streaked with grey, and deeply lined face told the story of countless days spent in Kodiak's harsh environment. Tom held Master Guide License number 47 from the Alaska Board of Game and was considered one of the most experienced brown bear guides in Alaska. He had successfully guided over 400 hunts without a single serious incident. a safety record that had earned him an impeccable reputation among serious big game hunters. The fifth member of their group was David Charles Peterson, 41, Tom's assistant guide and camp manager. David, originally from Minnesota, had moved to Alaska 15 years earlier, seeking adventure, and had found his calling in the wilderness guiding industry. At 5 feet 11 inches and 200 pounds, David possessed the endurance and bush skills necessary to support extended hunting expeditions in remote locations. He served as the expedition's logistics coordinator, responsible for managing camp operations, communication equipment, and emergency supplies. David's role was crucial to the hunt's success, as his attention to detail ensured that the group remained properly equipped and supplied throughout their stay in the refuge. Their camp was strategically positioned at coordinates 57.7833 degrees north, 153.2167 degrees west, approximately 12 miles southeast of Terror Lake, along what the locals called the Bear Creek drainage system. Tom had selected this location based on recent bear sign observations and favorable wind patterns that would allow them to approach hunting areas without alerting the notoriously keen-nosed brown bears to their presence. The camp consisted of 4 high-quality expedition tents arranged in a defensive semicircle, with the cooking and equipment area positioned in the center. A portable electric fence, powered by solar panels and backup batteries, surrounded the entire camp perimeter as protection against curious or aggressive bears. The terrain surrounding their camp was classic Kodiak brown bear habitat, a mosaic of alder thickets, open tundra meadows, salmon streams, and scattered stands of Sitka spruce. The elevation at their camp was approximately 800 feet above sea level, providing excellent visibility across the surrounding valleys, while remaining accessible to the floatplane that had transported them from Kodiak Village 3 days earlier. To the north, the landscape rose sharply toward the 2,500-foot peaks of the Kodiak Mountains, their slopes covered in a tapestry of autumn colors as the brief subarctic growing season reached its climax. October represented the peak of brown bear activity on Kodiak Island as the massive Bruins prepared for their winter hibernation by consuming enormous quantities of food. The salmon runs were entering their final phase, concentrating bears along major waterways as they took advantage of this protein-rich food source. Additionally, the abundant berry crops that had ripened throughout September were now beginning to decline, forcing bears to range more widely. In search of the 20,000 calories per day they needed to build sufficient fat reserves for their winter sleep. Tom had briefed the hunting party extensively about Kodiak brown bear behavior and safety protocols during their flight from Anchorage 4 days earlier. He explained that Kodiak bears, a subspecies of brown bear isolated on the Kodiak archipelago, represented the largest brown bears in the world. Adult males, called boars, could reach weights exceeding 1,500 pounds, with exceptional individuals topping 1,700 pounds. These massive predators possessed incredible strength, with documented cases of bears moving 500-pound rocks and bending steel culverts with their bare paws. Their sense of smell was estimated to be 7 times more acute than a bloodhound's, allowing them to detect food sources from distances exceeding 5 miles under favorable wind conditions. The hunting regulations for Kodiak brown bears were strictly enforced by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Each hunter was required to purchase a $500 brown bear tag, valid for a single animal, and could only harvest a bear that met specific minimum skull measurements. The season ran from October 1st through October 25th, providing a narrow window of opportunity for hunters to pursue these magnificent animals. All hunters were required to be accompanied by a licensed guide, and the guide was legally responsible for ensuring compliance with all applicable regulations. Jason had drawn his brown bear tag in the lottery system after applying for 7 consecutive years. The tag represented the culmination of a lifelong dream to hunt one of North America's most challenging and dangerous big game animals. He had spent thousands of dollars on equipment preparation, including custom-loaded ammunition, premium optics, and specialized cold weather gear. His rifle, a Winchester Model 70 Safari Express with a 24-inch barrel, was topped with a Leupold VX6 HD 2 to 12 times 42 mm scope and loaded with 300 grain Swift A-frame bullets designed for deep penetration on large, dangerous game. Kevin carried a Ruger guide gun in .416 Ruger, a compact and powerful rifle specifically designed for dangerous game hunting in thick cover. His ammunition consisted of 400 grain Barnes TSX bullets, chosen for their proven performance on large bears. Despite his initial reluctance about the hunt, Kevin had become increasingly excited as their departure date approached, spending countless hours at the shooting range, perfecting his marksmanship skills. Marcus, drawing on his military experience, had selected a custom-built rifle based on a Remington 700 Action chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum. The rifle featured a precision barrel, tactical stock, and high-quality optics designed for long-range accuracy. His ammunition load consisted of 250 grain Berger Elite Hunter bullets, capable of delivering devastating terminal performance at extended ranges. Marcus viewed the hunt through a tactical lens, analyzing terrain, wind patterns, and approach routes with the methodical mindset of a professional soldier. All three hunters carried backup handguns as additional protection against charging bears. Jason and Kevin both carried Smith & Wesson Model 6.29 revolvers chambered in .44 Magnum, while Marcus preferred a Glock 20 in 10mm auto loaded with hard-cast lead bullets. Tom carried a well-worn Smith & Wesson Model 29 in .44 Magnum, a revolver that had accompanied him on hundreds of hunts throughout his guiding career. The morning of October 21st dawned clear and cold, with high pressure dominating the weather pattern across south-central Alaska. The National Weather Service forecast called for partly cloudy skies, with temperatures reaching the mid-40s by afternoon, and light winds from the northeast. These conditions were ideal for hunting, as the stable weather would minimize scent dispersal and provide excellent visibility for spotting bears across the open tundra. Tom's planned route for the day would take them northeast from their camp along Bear Creek toward a series of salmon pools where he had observed significant bear activity during his scouting flights the previous week. The hike would cover approximately 6 miles of varied terrain, including dense alder thickets, open meadows, and rocky creek bottoms. Tom estimated the round-trip journey would require 8 to 10 hours, depending on game encounters and weather conditions. At 6:15 a.m., the hunting party consumed a hearty breakfast of scrambled eggs, bacon, and coffee prepared on their portable propane stove. David had awakened an hour earlier to begin meal preparation, understanding that proper nutrition was essential for maintaining energy and alertness during the demanding physical requirements of brown bear hunting. The hunters consumed approximately 800 calories each, along with ample fluids to ensure proper hydration for the day ahead. While eating, Tom reviewed the day's hunting plan, using detailed topographical maps spread across their camp table. He pointed out key landmarks, potential bear travel corridors, and emergency evacuation routes in case of injury or severe weather. Tom emphasized the importance of maintaining proper spacing between hunters, with each man positioned at least 30 yards from his nearest companion to prevent accidental shooting incidents. He also reviewed hand signals and emergency protocols, including the procedure for summoning helicopter evacuation if needed. The group's communication equipment included 2 Garmin InReach satellite communicators, capable of sending emergency messages and GPS coordinates to rescue services from anywhere in the world. Additionally, they carried a Motorola Emergency Locator Beacon, ELB, that would automatically transmit their position if activated. Their cell phones were useless in this remote location, with the nearest cell tower over 100 miles away across the Shelikof Strait. At 6:45 a.m., the hunters began the final equipment check that would precede their departure. Each man carried approximately 40 pounds of gear, including extra ammunition, first aid supplies, emergency shelter, food, water, and survival equipment. Their packs were high-quality expedition models designed to distribute weight evenly and provide comfortable carrying over long distances. Jason's pack contained 60 rounds of ammunition, a compact medical kit, emergency shelter, signaling devices, and 3 days of emergency food rations. Tom conducted a final safety briefing, reminding the hunters about proper muzzle discipline, target identification procedures, and the absolute requirement to wait for his authorization before taking any shot. He emphasized that wounded bears were exponentially more dangerous than undisturbed animals, and that shot placement was critical for achieving clean, ethical kills that minimized the risk of dangerous encounters. Tom had witnessed several incidents over his guiding career where poor shot placement had resulted in wounded, angry bears that posed significant threats to hunters and guides. The weather at departure was optimal, with light winds, good visibility, and stable atmospheric conditions. The temperature had risen to 42 degrees Fahrenheit, warm enough to prevent hypothermia, but cool enough to minimize perspiration during the strenuous hike ahead. Tom noted that the wind direction would allow them to approach their intended hunting areas without broadcasting their scent to any bears that might be present. At 7:12 a.m., the 5-man hunting party departed their camp, following a well-defined game trail that paralleled Bear Creek toward the northeast. Tom led the group, followed by Marcus, Jason, Kevin, and David, bringing up the rear. Their formation was designed to provide maximum safety while allowing quick communication and mutual support if needed. Each man carried his rifle at the ready, with a round chambered and the safety engaged. The initial portion of their route traversed relatively open tundra, carpeted with low-growing vegetation that provided excellent footing and clear visibility in all directions. The autumn colors were spectacular, with the tundra vegetation displaying brilliant reds, oranges, and yellows against the backdrop of snow-capped peaks. The air was crisp and clean, scented with the earthy aroma of decomposing vegetation and the distant saltiness of the ocean. As they hiked, Tom pointed out various signs of bear activity: partially eaten salmon carcasses, massive paw prints in soft mud beside the creek, and claw marks on alder trees where bears had marked their territory. The abundance of bear sign indicated a healthy population density, increasing their chances of encountering a mature boar suitable for harvest. Tom explained that they were looking specifically for a large, solitary male bear, as females with cubs were protected by law and younger bears typically didn't meet the minimum skull measurement requirements. After approximately 1 hour of hiking, at 8:15 a.m., the group encountered their first significant obstacle, a dense thicket of alder bushes that extended for several hundred yards along both sides of the creek. These thickets, locally known as alder hells, were notorious for concealing bears and creating dangerous close encounter situations. The alders grew in impenetrable tangles, reaching heights of 12 to 15 feet, with interlacing branches that blocked visibility beyond a few yards. Tom made the decision to push through the thicket rather than attempt a lengthy detour that would consume valuable hunting time. He emphasized the critical importance of maintaining noise discipline and staying alert for any signs of bear presence. The group would proceed single file, with Tom breaking trail and each hunter maintaining visual contact with the man ahead of him. If they encountered a bear at close range, they would rely on their firearms for protection, as retreat through the dense vegetation would be virtually impossible. The passage through the alder thicket proved to be slow and physically demanding, The interlaced branches caught on their clothing and equipment, forcing them to move in a series of carefully planned advances. The noise of their passage seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space, with every broken branch and rustling leaf potentially alerting bears to their presence. Tom's anxiety level increased significantly during this portion of the hunt, as he understood that alder thickets were among the most dangerous places to encounter brown bears. After 35 minutes of difficult travel, the hunting party finally emerged from the alder thicket at 8:50 a.m. into another area of open tundra. The relief of escaping the claustrophobic confines of the thick vegetation was palpable among all 5 men, and Tom called for a brief rest stop to allow everyone to catch their breath and rehydrate. During the break, he glassed the surrounding terrain with his Swarovski 15 by 56 binoculars, searching for any sign of bear activity. The landscape ahead of them was ideal brown bear habitat, a broad valley bottom with meandering creek channels, interspersed with open meadows and scattered groves of trees. The terrain offered numerous vantage points for glassing while providing sufficient cover for stalking approaches. Tom identified several locations where bears commonly fed on salmon, including a series of pools approximately 2 miles ahead where the creek formed natural fish traps. At 9:05 a.m., the group resumed their advance toward the salmon pools, maintaining their previous formation and discipline. The hiking became easier as they followed established game trails that provided firm footing and clear sightlines. Jason's confidence was building as they moved deeper into prime bear country, and he found himself mentally rehearsing the shooting sequence he had practiced hundreds of times at the range. Kevin remained more apprehensive than his companions, troubled by an indefinable sense of unease that seemed to intensify as they proceeded deeper into the wilderness. Despite his years of hunting experience in Alaska's backcountry, something about this particular day felt different, although he couldn't articulate exactly what was bothering him. He found himself scanning the surrounding terrain more frequently than usual, searching for movement or other signs of danger. Marcus, drawing on his military training, maintained a constant state of tactical awareness. His eyes continuously swept the terrain ahead, searching for defensive positions, escape routes, and potential threats. He noted that the wind had shifted slightly since their departure from camp, now blowing from the southeast at approximately 5 miles per hour. This wind direction would carry their scent toward any bears located northwest of their position, potentially alerting the animals to their presence. At 9:32 a.m., Tom suddenly raised his hand in the signal for a complete halt. Through his binoculars, he had spotted movement in a grove of spruce trees approximately 800 yards ahead. After several minutes of careful observation, he confirmed the presence of a large brown bear feeding on salmon at the creek's edge. The bear appeared to be a mature boar, with the massive size and distinctive shoulder hump characteristic of adult male brown bears. Tom passed his binoculars to Jason, allowing him to examine the bear and assess its potential as a trophy. The animal was indeed impressive, with a thick, dark brown coat and massive frame that suggested it would easily meet the minimum skull measurement requirements. Jason estimated the bear's weight at over 900 pounds, making it one of the largest animals he had ever seen in the wild. The hunters spent 20 minutes observing the bear's behavior, noting its feeding patterns and movement tendencies. The animal appeared relaxed and unaware of their presence, methodically working along the creek bank in search of spawning salmon. Tom determined that a stalk was feasible as the terrain offered sufficient cover to approach within reasonable shooting range without alerting the bear. At 9:55 a.m., Tom initiated the stalking approach, leading the hunters in a wide circle that would bring them to within 200 yards of the feeding bear while remaining downwind. The stalk required extreme caution, as brown bears possess extraordinarily keen hearing and could detect the slightest unnatural sound from considerable distances. Each step was carefully planned and executed, with the hunters moving only when the bear's attention was focused on feeding. The stalking approach consumed nearly an hour, as the hunters were forced to move with painstaking slowness to avoid detection. They utilized every available piece of cover, including small ridges, scattered boulders, and patches of low vegetation. Tom's experience was evident in his route selection, as he successfully brought the group to within shooting range without alerting the bear to their presence. At 10:50 a.m., the hunters reached their final position approximately 180 yards from the unsuspecting bear. Jason prepared for the shot, settling into a stable shooting position behind a fallen log that provided excellent support for his rifle. The bear was positioned broadside, offering an ideal target presentation for a clean, ethical shot. Jason's crosshairs settled on the bear's vitals, his finger moving to the trigger as he prepared to harvest the animal that represented the culmination of years of planning and preparation. Before Jason could fire, however, the situation changed dramatically. A second bear, this one even larger than the first, suddenly emerged from the thick vegetation approximately 50 yards to their left. This bear was massive beyond comprehension, with a shoulder height that appeared to exceed 4 feet and a bulk that dwarfed even the large boar they had been stalking. Tom immediately recognized this animal as one of the legendary giant boars that inhabited the most remote areas of Kodiak Island, bears that rarely showed themselves to human observers. The appearance of the second bear created a complex situation that required immediate decision-making. The first bear remained unaware of their presence and continued feeding, presenting a clear shot opportunity. However, the second, much larger bear was moving in their direction, potentially setting up a dangerous close encounter. Tom faced the difficult choice of whether to authorize Jason's shot on the first bear or attempt to reposition for a chance at the much larger animal. As Tom weighed his options, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The wind, which had been steady from the southeast, suddenly shifted to the southwest, carrying their scent directly toward both bears. The larger bear immediately detected their presence, raising its massive head and testing the air with its sensitive nose. Within seconds, the bear had pinpointed their location and began moving purposefully in their direction. Tom realized that they were facing an extremely dangerous situation. The approaching bear displayed none of the typical wariness that characterizes most brown bear encounters with humans. Instead, this animal showed signs of aggressive intent, with its ears laid back, hackles raised, and a distinctive rolling gait that experienced guides recognized as a precursor to an attack. Tom had seen this behavior pattern only twice before in his 23-year guiding career, and both previous incidents had resulted in serious injuries. At 11:04 a.m., Tom made the critical decision to order an immediate retreat from their position. He recognized that their location was tactically disadvantageous, with limited escape routes and insufficient cover to provide protection against a determined attack. The hunters began moving toward higher ground, approximately 200 yards behind their position, hoping to reach a more defensible location before the approaching bear could close the distance. The retreat immediately triggered an aggressive response from the massive bear. The animal broke into a purposeful lope, covering ground with frightening speed despite its enormous size. Brown bears, despite their bulk, can reach speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour over short distances, faster than any human can run, even on level ground. The rough terrain surrounding the hunters made rapid movement even more difficult, creating a situation where outrunning the bear was impossible. As the bear closed to within 75 yards, Tom made the decision to stand and fight rather than continue a futile retreat. He shouted for the hunters to form a defensive line and prepare to fire on his command. Jason, Kevin, and Marcus quickly arranged themselves in a semicircle, their rifles trained on the approaching predator. David positioned himself slightly behind the others, ready to provide supporting fire if needed. The bear continued its charge, displaying the incredible determination and fearlessness that made brown bear attacks so devastating. At 50 yards, Tom gave the command to fire, and all 4 rifles discharged simultaneously. The combined impact of 4 high-powered bullets should have been sufficient to stop any bear, but this particular animal possessed a size and strength that defied normal expectations. Marcus's shot, fired from his .338 Lapua Magnum, struck the bear in the chest but failed to penetrate deeply enough to reach vital organs. Jason's .375 H&H bullet hit the bear's left shoulder, causing significant tissue damage, but not immediately incapacitating the animal. Kevin's .416 Ruger round impacted the bear's neck area, while Tom's shot from his .44 Magnum revolver struck the bear's face, deflecting off the massive skull without penetrating. The wounded bear's response was explosive. Rather than being deterred by the gunfire, the animal's aggression intensified to a level that none of the hunters had ever witnessed. The bear's roar was deafening, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself and struck primal terror into the hearts of all 5 men. Blood streaming from its wounds, the bear continued its charge with undiminished speed and determination. At 11:06 a.m., the massive brown bear reached the defensive line formed by the 5 hunters. The animal's incredible size became fully apparent as it reared up on its hind legs, towering over the men at a height exceeding 9 feet. Its massive paws, armed with claws over 4 inches long, swept through the air with lethal intent. The bear's weight, later estimated at over 1,100 pounds, gave it tremendous momentum that proved impossible to stop with conventional firearms. Jason, positioned at the left end of the defensive line, bore the brunt of the initial attack. The bear's massive right paw struck him across the chest and shoulder with devastating force, launching his 215-pound frame through the air as if he weighed nothing. The impact shattered multiple ribs and caused severe internal injuries, but Jason remained conscious and attempted to bring his rifle to bear for a follow-up shot. The bear immediately pursued him, covering the distance in 2 massive bounds. Kevin, positioned next to Jason, attempted to deliver a coup de grace shot to the bear's head, but was unable to achieve a clear firing angle without risking hitting his wounded friend. As he maneuvered for a better position, the bear's attention suddenly shifted to him, and Kevin found himself facing the full fury of the enraged predator. The bear's left paw caught Kevin across the side of his head, crushing his skull and killing him instantly. His body crumpled to the ground, blood pooling rapidly beneath his shattered head. Marcus, drawing on his military combat experience, maintained his composure better than the others and managed to deliver 2 additional shots into the bear's torso. His .338 Lapua Magnum rounds penetrated deeply into the animal's chest cavity, causing massive internal damage that would eventually prove fatal. However, the bear's incredible size and strength allowed it to continue fighting despite injuries that would have immediately incapacitated a smaller animal. Tom attempted to distract the bear by shouting and firing his revolver repeatedly, hoping to draw the animal's attention away from the injured hunters. His tactic partially succeeded, as the bear momentarily turned toward him with murderous intent. However, before Tom could retreat to a safer position, the bear's massive jaw clamped down on his left leg, crushing bone and tissue with hydraulic force. Tom's screams of agony echoed across the valley as the bear began shaking him like a rag doll. David, positioned at the rear of the group, found himself in the impossible situation of trying to provide effective fire support while avoiding hitting his companions. His rifle, a .30-06 Springfield loaded with standard hunting ammunition, was inadequate for stopping such a massive and determined predator. Nevertheless, he continued firing, hoping to inflict enough additional damage to finally bring down the rampaging bear. The attack continued for what seemed like hours, but actually lasted less than 3 minutes. The bear's incredible strength and endurance allowed it to maul multiple victims simultaneously, moving from one hunter to another with frightening speed and agility. Jason, though severely injured in the initial attack, managed to crawl approximately 20 yards before the bear returned to him for a second assault. The animal's massive jaws closed around Jason's torso, and the crushing pressure caused internal organs to rupture and bones to splinter. Marcus, despite his military training and combat experience, found himself overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity and supernatural strength of the attacking bear. His rifle jammed after firing 6 rounds, leaving him armed only with his Glock 20 pistol loaded with 10mm ammunition. At point-blank range, he emptied the entire 15-round magazine into the bear's head and neck area, finally beginning to show some effect on the animal's aggressive behavior. Tom, his leg mangled beyond recognition by the bear's crushing bite, attempted to crawl toward the emergency radio equipment in his pack. However, the bear noticed his movement and returned to continue the attack. The animal's claws raked across Tom's back, tearing through his heavy clothing and inflicting deep lacerations that exposed underlying muscle and bone. Tom's attempts to play dead proved ineffective, as the bear continued mauling his motionless body. David, recognizing that conventional firearms were proving ineffective against this particular bear, made the desperate decision to attempt a close-range attack with his bear spray. The oleoresin capsicum canister contained a concentrated pepper solution designed specifically for deterring aggressive bears, but it required him to approach within 25 feet of the rampaging animal. As David closed the distance, the bear suddenly turned toward him, and he discharged the entire contents of the canister directly into the animal's face and eyes. The bear spray had an immediate and dramatic effect. The concentrated pepper solution caused severe irritation to the bear's eyes, nose, and respiratory system, temporarily blinding the animal and causing it to retreat from the immediate area of the attack. However, rather than fleeing completely, the bear remained in the vicinity, shaking its massive head and pawing at its eyes, while emitting roars of pain and frustration. David used this temporary reprieve to assess the condition of his companions and attempt to provide immediate first aid to the survivors. Kevin was clearly beyond help, his skull crushed and his body motionless in an expanding pool of blood. Jason was unconscious but still breathing, though his injuries appeared to be life-threatening. Tom was conscious but in severe shock from blood loss and traumatic injuries to his leg and back. Marcus had sustained significant lacerations to his arms and torso, but remained mobile and alert. At 11:11 a.m., David activated one of their emergency satellite communicators and transmitted a distress signal to the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center, RCC, in Juneau. The message included their precise GPS coordinates, the nature of the emergency, and a request for immediate helicopter evacuation of multiple seriously injured hunters. The RCC acknowledged receipt of the emergency transmission and initiated search and rescue protocols within minutes of receiving David's call. The wounded bear, though temporarily deterred by the bear spray, remained in the immediate vicinity and continued to pose a significant threat to the survivors. The animal's injuries from multiple gunshot wounds were beginning to take their toll, but its incredible size and strength allowed it to remain dangerous for an extended period. David realized that they needed to establish a more defensible position while waiting for rescue personnel to arrive. Working with Marcus, who despite his injuries remained functional, David began moving the wounded hunters to a small rocky outcropping approximately 50 yards from the attack site. The elevated position would provide some protection against another bear attack while offering better visibility for approaching rescue helicopters. The task of moving Jason and Tom proved extremely difficult, as both men had sustained injuries that made transportation dangerous and painful. Jason drifted in and out of consciousness during the move, occasionally mumbling incoherently about his family and expressing concern for his hunting companions. His breathing was shallow and labored, indicating possible internal bleeding and lung damage from the bear's crushing attack. David applied pressure bandages to Jason's most obvious wounds, but realized that the internal injuries were beyond his ability to treat in the field. Tom's condition was somewhat more stable, though his mangled leg continued to bleed heavily, despite David's attempts to control the hemorrhaging with pressure bandages and a tourniquet improvised from paracord. Tom remained conscious and lucid, providing valuable information about their exact location and the best helicopter landing sites in the immediate area. His 23 years of guiding experience proved invaluable in coordinating the rescue effort. At 11:28 a.m., the Alaska RCC contacted the 210th Rescue Squadron at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson near Anchorage, requesting immediate deployment of an HH-60G Pavehawk helicopter for medical evacuation. The rescue squadron, part of the Air Force Reserve's pararescue organization, maintained a constant state of readiness for exactly this type of emergency. Within 15 minutes of receiving the alert, an HH-60G helicopter with a full pararescue team was airborne and heading toward Kodiak Island. The flight from Anchorage to the accident site covered approximately 250 nautical miles across some of Alaska's most challenging terrain and weather conditions. The helicopter crew, led by Aircraft Commander Major Sarah Collins, included co-pilot Captain Mike Rodriguez, Flight Engineer Technical Sergeant Dave Thompson, and 2 pararescue specialists, Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison and Senior Airman Chris Peterson. All crew members were highly experienced in conducting search and rescue operations in Alaska's wilderness areas. Major Collins pushed the HH-60G to its maximum cruising speed of 180 miles per hour, understanding that time was critical for the seriously injured hunters. The helicopter's advanced navigation and communication systems allowed the crew to maintain contact with both the Alaska RCC and the survivors on the ground throughout the flight. Weather conditions remained favorable, with clear skies and light winds that would facilitate the rescue operation. Meanwhile, at the attack site, the wounded bear had moved approximately 200 yards away, but remained visible through binoculars. The animal appeared to be weakening from its injuries, moving slowly and stopping frequently to rest. However, David and Marcus maintained constant vigilance, knowing that wounded bears could remain dangerous for hours or even days after sustaining serious injuries. They kept their remaining firearms loaded and ready while attending to their injured companions. At 12:15 p.m., approximately 1 hour and 10 minutes after the attack, the survivors heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors echoing across the valley. The HH-60G Pavehawk appeared over the southern ridge, its powerful turbine engines creating a welcome sound of approaching rescue. Major Collins made several reconnaissance passes over the area, identifying the attack site, the survivors' position, and potential landing zones. The helicopter crew quickly identified the best landing site as a flat area of tundra, approximately 300 yards from the survivors' position. The distance would require the pararescue team to traverse some difficult terrain while carrying medical equipment, but it represented the safest option for the aircraft given the surrounding obstacles and terrain features. Major Collins executed a textbook landing, touching down gently on the soft tundra surface. Staff Sergeant Morrison and Senior Airman Peterson immediately disembarked with their medical equipment and began moving toward the survivors' position. Both para-rescuemen were highly trained in trauma medicine and had extensive experience treating combat casualties and wilderness injuries. They carried advanced medical supplies including intravenous fluids, pain medications, airway management equipment, and portable monitoring devices. The para-rescuemen's initial assessment of the injured hunters revealed the severity of the situation. Kevin was confirmed deceased, having sustained fatal head trauma in the bear attack. Jason was unconscious with signs of severe internal bleeding, multiple fractured ribs, and possible spinal injuries. Tom was conscious but in shock from blood loss and traumatic injuries to his leg. Marcus had sustained significant lacerations but was ambulatory and alert. Morrison immediately began advanced trauma life support procedures on Jason, establishing an IV line for fluid resuscitation and administering pain medication. Peterson focused on stabilizing Tom's injuries, applying proper splinting and bandaging techniques to control bleeding and prevent further damage during transport. Both para-rescuemen worked with the efficiency and skill that came from years of training and experience in treating critically injured patients. The medical treatment and patient preparation required 45 minutes before the injured hunters were ready for helicopter evacuation. Each patient required careful immobilization and packaging to prevent further injury during the flight to definitive medical care. Jason, being the most critically injured, received priority attention and was prepared for immediate transport to the nearest trauma center. At 1:30 p.m., the helicopter departed the accident site with Jason and Tom aboard, leaving Marcus and David to be evacuated on a second trip. The flight to Providence, Alaska Medical Center in Anchorage would require approximately 90 minutes, during which the pararescue team would continue providing advanced life support care. Jason's condition remained critical throughout the flight, with his vital signs indicating severe internal bleeding and possible organ damage. Tom's condition was more stable, though his mangled leg would require multiple surgeries and extensive rehabilitation. During the flight, he provided a detailed account of the attack to the pararescue team, helping them understand the nature and extent of his injuries. Tom's experience and training as a professional guide had undoubtedly saved lives during the attack, as his quick thinking and tactical decisions had prevented an even worse outcome. The helicopter made a brief fuel stop at Kodiak Airport before returning to evacuate Marcus and David from the accident site. Both men had used the intervening time to gather essential gear and document the scene for the subsequent investigation. Marcus, despite his injuries, had collected spent ammunition cases and taken photographs that would prove valuable to wildlife authorities investigating the incident. At 3:45 p.m., the helicopter completed its second evacuation trip, bringing Marcus and David to Anchorage for medical evaluation and debriefing. Marcus required surgical repair of deep lacerations to his arms and torso, but was expected to make a full recovery. David, who had escaped serious physical injury, was treated for shock and released after observation. The helicopter crew also transported Kevin's body from the accident site, ensuring that all 5 members of the hunting party were accounted for and evacuated from the remote location. The recovery of Kevin's remains was particularly difficult for his companions, as he had been a beloved friend and respected member of their hunting group. At Providence, Alaska Medical Center, Jason underwent immediate emergency surgery to address his internal injuries. The surgical team, led by Dr. Amanda Foster, worked for over 6 hours to repair damaged organs, stabilize fractured ribs, and address internal bleeding. Jason's injuries were among the most severe that the trauma team had encountered, and his survival remained uncertain for several days following the attack. Tom also required multiple surgeries to address his leg injuries, with orthopedic surgeons working to save the limb from amputation. The bear's crushing bite had caused extensive damage to bones, muscles, tendons, and blood vessels, requiring complex reconstructive procedures. Dr. Robert Chen, the lead orthopedic surgeon, described Tom's injuries as among the most challenging he had encountered in 20 years of practice. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game launched an immediate investigation into the bear attack, dispatching a team of wildlife biologists and enforcement officers to the scene. The investigation team, led by Master Guide Licensing Supervisor Janet Williams, arrived at the site on October 22nd to document the scene and attempt to locate the attacking bear. The investigation revealed that the attacking bear was indeed a massive adult male, estimated to weigh over 1,100 pounds based on track measurements and physical evidence at the scene. This animal represented one of the largest brown bears ever documented on Kodiak Island, with paw prints measuring over 14 inches in length. The bear's exceptional size explained its ability to continue fighting despite sustaining multiple gunshot wounds that would have quickly killed a smaller animal. Tracking efforts revealed that the wounded bear had traveled approximately 2 miles from the attack site before succumbing to its injuries. The animal was found dead in a dense thicket of alder bushes, having bled to death from the multiple gunshot wounds inflicted during the defensive action. A post-mortem examination confirmed that the bear had been hit by at least 6 bullets, with several rounds penetrating vital organs. The investigation concluded that the attack was unprovoked and that the hunting party had followed all applicable safety protocols and regulations. The bear's aggressive behavior was attributed to its exceptional size and dominance, characteristics that made it less likely to flee from human contact. The investigation report noted that such large bears occasionally displayed territorial aggression toward humans, particularly during the pre-hibernation feeding period when they were focused on accumulating fat reserves. Media coverage of the attack was extensive, with news organizations from across North America reporting on the incident. The story captured public attention due to the extreme nature of the attack and the exceptional size of the attacking bear. Wildlife experts interviewed by news outlets emphasized that such attacks were extremely rare, with most brown bear encounters resulting in the bears fleeing from human contact. Dr. Sterling Miller, a retired Alaska Department of Fish and Game biologist and brown bear expert, told reporters that the attacking bear likely weighed between 1,100 and 1,200 pounds, making it one of the largest brown bears ever documented. Miller explained that such massive bears were extremely rare, with only a few dozen individuals of this size believed to exist on Kodiak Island. He noted that the bear's exceptional size had likely contributed to its aggressive behavior, as dominant males sometimes displayed territorial responses to perceived threats. The attack also sparked renewed debate about hunting safety protocols and firearm selection for dangerous game hunting. Several firearms experts questioned whether the hunters' weapon choices had been adequate for stopping such a massive predator, noting that even large-caliber rifles could prove insufficient against exceptionally large and determined bears. Kevin's funeral service was held in Fairbanks on October 28th, attended by over 300 friends, family members and colleagues from Alaska's hunting and outdoor community. His widow Sarah delivered a moving eulogy describing Kevin as a devoted husband and father who had died pursuing his passion for Alaska's wilderness. The service included presentations by Jason and Marcus, both of whom had been released from the hospital to attend their friend's funeral. Jason's recovery proved to be long and difficult, requiring multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation. His injuries included 7 fractured ribs, a punctured lung, severe kidney damage, and extensive soft tissue trauma. Despite the severity of his injuries, Jason's determination and positive attitude contributed to a recovery that exceeded his doctor's expectations. He was able to return to work part-time after 6 months, though his physical capabilities remained permanently diminished. Tom's rehabilitation was even more challenging, as his leg injuries required over a dozen surgical procedures and extensive physical therapy. Despite the medical team's efforts, Tom was left with a permanent limp and chronic pain that forced him to retire from guiding. He eventually found work as a hunting consultant and firearms instructor, drawing on his extensive experience to help other hunters prepare for dangerous game expeditions. Marcus's recovery was the most complete of the three survivors, though he continued to struggle with post-traumatic stress symptoms related to the attack. His military background helped him cope with the psychological aftermath, but he found himself unable to continue hunting bears and instead focused his outdoor activities on less dangerous game species. He eventually returned to his firearms instruction career, but required counseling to address anxiety and sleep disturbances. David, though physically uninjured in the attack, suffered significant psychological trauma from witnessing the death of his colleague and the severe injuries sustained by the hunters under his care. He took a leave of absence from guiding and underwent extensive counseling to address survivors' guilt and post-traumatic stress disorder. David eventually returned to outdoor work, but chose to focus on fishing guides rather than hunting expeditions. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game implemented several policy changes following their investigation of the attack. New regulations required brown bear guides to carry minimum caliber firearms for emergency protection, with .375 H and H Magnum established as the minimum acceptable caliber. Additionally, all guided brown bear hunts were required to include bear spray as backup protection, and guides were mandated to complete enhanced safety training focused on dangerous game encounters. The incident also prompted research into brown bear behavior and attack patterns, with biologists studying the factors that contributed to aggressive encounters between humans and bears. Dr. Sarah Jenkins, a wildlife biologist with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, initiated a 5-year study examining the relationship between bear size, dominance behavior, and human aggression. Her preliminary findings suggested that exceptionally large bears might indeed display different behavioral patterns than smaller individuals. Insurance companies that provided coverage for hunting expeditions reviewed their policies following the attack, with several carriers implementing additional safety requirements for dangerous game hunts. Some insurers began requiring hunters to demonstrate proficiency with their firearms through documented range time and to carry specific minimum equipment loads, including bear spray, satellite communicators, and first aid supplies. The attack site itself became a subject of scientific interest, with researchers documenting the physical evidence left by the encounter. The disturbed vegetation, blood spatter patterns, and ground disturbance provided valuable data about brown bear attack dynamics and the effectiveness of various defensive measures. This information was incorporated into training programs for guides, wildlife officers, and outdoor recreationalists. 1 year after the attack, the survivors gathered at Kevin's gravesite to commemorate their friend and reflect on the experience that had forever changed their lives. Jason, walking with a cane due to his ongoing recovery, spoke about the importance of cherishing every day and maintaining perspective on life's true priorities. Tom, still struggling with his leg injuries, expressed gratitude for surviving the encounter and emphasized the unpredictable nature of wilderness experiences. Marcus, though physically recovered from his injuries, continued to grapple with the psychological aftermath of the attack. He had developed a deep respect for the power and unpredictability of Alaska's wildlife, tempered by an understanding that such encounters, while tragic, were part of the inherent risks of pursuing adventure in wild places. His military experience had taught him to process trauma and continue functioning, skills that proved valuable in his recovery. David had gradually returned to outdoor guiding work, though he chose to focus on less dangerous activities such as fishing and bird-watching expeditions. The attack had reinforced his respect for Alaska's wildlife while teaching him valuable lessons about crisis management and emergency response. He used his experience to help train other guides in safety protocols and emergency procedures. The story of the October 21st attack became part of Alaska's hunting folklore, serving as both a cautionary tale about the dangers of brown bear hunting and a testament to human resilience in the face of adversity. Experienced guides throughout Alaska incorporated lessons learned from the incident into their safety briefings and training programs. The exceptional size of the attacking bear and the intensity of the encounter made it a reference point for discussions about dangerous game hunting safety. Wildlife authorities continued monitoring brown bear populations on Kodiak Island, with particular attention to exceptionally large individuals that might pose elevated risks to human visitors. The attack had demonstrated that even experienced hunters and guides could find themselves overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their control, emphasizing the importance of preparation, proper equipment, and quick decision-making in dangerous situations. The families of all 5 men involved in the attack struggled with the long-term emotional consequences of the incident. Kevin's widow, Sarah, established a scholarship fund in his memory to support young Alaskans interested in wildlife biology and outdoor education. The scholarship program aimed to promote safe and responsible outdoor recreation while honoring Kevin's passion for Alaska's wilderness. Jason's family dealt with the stress of his extended recovery and the financial burden of his medical expenses. Despite having insurance coverage, the specialized treatments and rehabilitation services required for his injuries created significant out-of-pocket costs. The Alaska hunting community rallied to support Jason's family through fundraising events and direct financial assistance. Tom's family faced similar challenges as he adapted to his permanent disabilities and career limitations. His wife Linda became his primary caregiver during the extended rehabilitation process, while their teenage children struggled to understand how their father's passion for guiding had led to such devastating consequences. The family eventually relocated to a community with better access to medical services and disability support resources. The incident prompted renewed discussion about the ethics and safety of brown bear hunting, with some advocates calling for stricter regulations or complete prohibition of such activities. However, hunting organizations and wildlife managers argued that properly conducted hunting programs played important roles in wildlife conservation and population management, while generating revenue for conservation efforts and local communities. Dr. Miller's analysis of the attack emphasized that such encounters remained extremely rare, despite the extensive brown bear hunting that occurred annually on Kodiak Island. He noted that the attacking bear's exceptional size placed it in a category that included perhaps fewer than 50 individual animals across the entire Kodiak archipelago. The statistical probability of encountering such a massive and aggressive bear was infinitesimally small, though the consequences could be catastrophic when such encounters occurred. The Alaska Professional Hunters Association implemented new training requirements for brown bear guides following the attack investigation. The enhanced training program included advanced first aid certification, emergency communication procedures, and scenario-based exercises designed to prepare guides for dangerous encounters. The association also developed new equipment standards requiring guides to carry specified minimum firearms, ammunition quantities, and safety equipment. Research initiated following the attack began providing valuable insights into brown bear behavior and human-bear interactions. Dr. Jenkins's ongoing study documented significant behavioral differences between exceptionally large bears and smaller individuals, with larger bears showing increased confidence and reduced flight responses when encountering humans. This research contributed to the development of new safety protocols for wilderness recreation in bear habitats. The medical community also benefited from lessons learned during the treatment of the attack survivors. The trauma team at Providence Alaska Medical Center published a case study detailing the injuries and treatment protocols used for brown bear mauling victims. The study became required reading for emergency medicine residents and trauma surgeons throughout Alaska and other regions with dangerous wildlife populations. 2 years after the attack, Jason made a pilgrimage back to Kodiak Island to visit the site where Kevin had died and to confront his own memories of the traumatic event. Accompanied by a counselor and his wife, Jason found a measure of peace in returning to the place that had forever changed his life. He placed a memorial marker at the attack site and spent several hours reflecting on the experience and its impact on his perspective on life and mortality. Tom never returned to Kodiak Island, finding that his physical limitations and psychological associations with the location made such a visit too difficult. Instead, he focused his energy on helping other guides learn from the incident through training programs and safety seminars. His first-hand account of the attack became a powerful teaching tool for emphasizing the importance of preparation and quick decision-making in emergency situations. Marcus eventually resumed limited hunting activities, though he avoided dangerous game species and focused on smaller animals that posed minimal threat to human safety. His military training had provided him with tools for processing trauma and maintaining functionality, but the attack had fundamentally altered his relationship with hunting and the outdoors. He found greater satisfaction in teaching firearms safety and marksmanship skills to other hunters. The attack's impact extended beyond the immediate participants to affect the broader Alaska guiding and hunting community. Many experienced guides reassessed their safety protocols and equipment selections based on lessons learned from the incident. The Alaska Professional Hunters Association documented numerous changes in guiding practices that could be directly attributed to the October 21st attack. Insurance companies specializing in outdoor recreation coverage developed new risk assessment models based partly on data from the Kodiak attack. These models considered factors such as prey species, guide experience, group size, and equipment selection in determining coverage terms and premium costs. The attack had demonstrated that even low-probability events could result in catastrophic consequences, requiring significant financial resources. The scientific community's interest in the attack led to several research initiatives focused on understanding brown bear behavior and human-bear interactions. Universities in Alaska and other regions with large bear populations initiated studies examining factors that contributed to aggressive encounters. The exceptional size of the attacking bear and the detailed documentation of the incident provided researchers with valuable data for understanding predator behavior patterns. Kevin's children, who had been ages 8, 10, and 12 at the time of their father's death, struggled with the long-term impacts of losing their father in such a traumatic manner. Sarah worked with counselors and support groups to help her children process their grief while maintaining positive memories of their father's passion for the outdoors. The family eventually established an annual camping trip in Kevin's memory, though they chose locations far from bear habitats. The attack also influenced wildlife management policies beyond hunting regulations. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game enhanced its bear monitoring programs, with particular attention to identifying and tracking exceptionally large individuals that might pose elevated risks to human visitors. New protocols required biologists to document and report encounters with bears exceeding certain size thresholds. Emergency response agencies throughout Alaska incorporated lessons from the Kodiak rescue into their training programs. The successful evacuation of the attack survivors demonstrated the effectiveness of satellite communication technology and coordinated rescue operations. However, the incident also highlighted the challenges of providing timely medical care in remote locations where helicopter access might be limited by weather or terrain conditions. 3 years after the attack, the survivors participated in a documentary film about the incident produced by a major television network. The film, titled Terror on Kodiak: When Giants Attack, featured interviews with all 3 survivors, rescue personnel, medical staff, and wildlife experts. The documentary provided a comprehensive examination of the attack, while emphasizing safety lessons for other hunters and outdoor enthusiasts. The documentary's broadcast reached millions of viewers and sparked renewed public interest in brown bear conservation and hunting safety. Wildlife organizations reported increased donations and volunteer participation following the broadcast, suggesting that the tragic incident had motivated greater public engagement with conservation efforts. The program also led to increased enrollment in wilderness safety courses and first aid training programs. Jason's participation in the documentary marked a significant milestone in his psychological recovery from the attack. He had initially been reluctant to relive the traumatic experience, but eventually decided that sharing his story might help prevent similar tragedies. His account of the attack and recovery process provided viewers with insights into the long-term consequences of wildlife encounters and the importance of proper preparation. Tom's interview segments focused on his 23 years of guiding experience and the lessons he had learned from the attack. He emphasized that the incident represented an extremely unusual combination of circumstances involving an exceptionally large and aggressive bear. Tom's message to other guides stressed the importance of constant vigilance and proper equipment selection when working in dangerous game environments. The documentary also featured extensive interviews with the rescue personnel who had evacuated the survivors from the attack site. Major Collins and her helicopter crew described the challenges of conducting medical evacuations in remote wilderness areas and the critical importance of satellite communication technology. Their account highlighted the skill and dedication of Alaska's search and rescue community. Dr. Foster, the trauma surgeon who had treated Jason's injuries, provided medical perspective on the severity of brown bear attacks and the challenges of treating such injuries. Her segment emphasized the importance of rapid evacuation and advanced trauma care in improving survival rates for attack victims. The medical community used her presentation as a teaching tool for emergency medicine training programs. 4 years after the attack, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game published a comprehensive report analyzing brown bear incidents throughout the state over the previous decade. The Kodiak attack was featured as a case study in the report, which documented trends in human-bear encounters and evaluated the effectiveness of various safety measures. The report concluded that while bear attacks remained rare, their consequences could be severe enough to justify extensive safety precautions. The report also analyzed the effectiveness of different firearm calibers and ammunition types in stopping dangerous bear attacks. Data from the Kodiak incident and other encounters suggested that shot placement was more critical than caliber selection, though minimum power thresholds were necessary for adequate penetration on large bears. The analysis influenced ammunition recommendations for hunters pursuing dangerous game species. Marcus's ongoing struggles with post-traumatic stress led him to become an advocate for mental health support for trauma survivors. He worked with veterans organizations and hunting groups to raise awareness about the psychological impacts of traumatic events and the importance of seeking professional help. His military background provided credibility when discussing trauma recovery with other veterans and outdoor enthusiasts. David eventually returned to full-time guiding work, though he specialized in fishing expeditions and nature photography tours rather than hunting activities. His experience during the bear attack had taught him valuable lessons about crisis management and emergency response that enhanced his effectiveness as a guide. David incorporated detailed safety briefings and emergency preparedness training into all of his expeditions. The attack site itself became a location of scientific interest, with researchers conducting periodic visits to study vegetation recovery and wildlife behavior patterns. The disturbed area gradually returned to its natural state, though careful observers could still identify subtle signs of the violent encounter. Wildlife cameras placed in the vicinity documented normal bear activity patterns, suggesting that the location had not been permanently altered by the incident. 5 years after the attack, Kevin's widow Sarah remarried, finding love with a man who understood and respected her late husband's memory. The wedding ceremony included a tribute to Kevin and recognition of the ongoing impact of his death on the family. Sarah's new husband, himself an outdoorsman, helped maintain Kevin's connection to hunting and fishing through activities with Kevin's children. Jason's recovery continued to progress, though he would never regain his full pre-attack physical capabilities. He adapted to his limitations by finding new ways to enjoy the outdoors, including photography and less strenuous hunting activities. Jason's experience had given him a deeper appreciation for life's fragility and the importance of cherishing time with family and friends. The attack's influence on Alaska's guiding industry remained evident years later, with safety protocols and equipment requirements that could be traced directly to lessons learned from the incident. New guides entering the profession received training that included detailed analysis of the Kodiak attack and its implications for emergency preparedness. The incident had become an integral part of the institutional knowledge passed down through Alaska's guiding community. Research projects initiated following the attack continued producing valuable scientific insights into brown bear behavior and human-wildlife interactions. Dr. Jenkins's study had documented significant findings about the relationship between bear size and aggressive behavior, contributing to improved safety recommendations for wilderness recreation. Her work was published in leading wildlife management journals and influenced policy decisions throughout North America. The exceptional size of the attacking bear continued to generate scientific interest, with researchers studying factors that contributed to such extreme growth in wild animals. Genetic analysis of tissue samples revealed unique characteristics that may have contributed to the bear's massive size and aggressive behavior. This research contributed to broader understanding of predator population dynamics and evolutionary biology. Insurance industry changes implemented after the attack had lasting impacts on the economics of dangerous game hunting. Higher premiums and stricter safety requirements increased the cost and complexity of organizing brown bear hunts, though these changes were generally accepted as necessary for reducing risks and improving outcomes. The industry developed more sophisticated risk assessment models that considered numerous factors in determining coverage terms. The medical community's interest in treating brown bear attack victims led to improved protocols and specialized training programs. Dr. Foster's trauma team developed treatment algorithms specifically designed for brown bear mauling injuries, which were adopted by medical facilities throughout Alaska and other regions with dangerous wildlife populations. The protocols emphasized rapid assessment, aggressive fluid resuscitation, and early surgical intervention. 6 years after the attack, the survivors gathered once again to commemorate Kevin's memory and reflect on their shared experience. The annual gathering had become an important ritual for processing their trauma and maintaining their friendship despite the geographic distances that separated them. Each year's meeting provided an opportunity to assess their ongoing recovery and support each other through continuing challenges. Tom's physical condition had stabilized, though he continued to deal with chronic pain and mobility limitations from his leg injuries. He had found meaningful work training new guides and sharing his experience through safety seminars and training programs. Tom's reputation as a skilled and safety-conscious guide had actually been enhanced by his handling of the attack situation and his subsequent contributions to industry safety improvements. The attack's legacy extended beyond the immediate participants to influence wildlife management philosophy and outdoor recreation safety practices throughout North America. The incident demonstrated that even extremely rare events could have catastrophic consequences, justifying investments in safety equipment, training programs, and emergency response capabilities that might otherwise seem excessive. Educational institutions throughout Alaska incorporated the Kodiak attack into their curriculum for programs related to wildlife management, outdoor recreation, and emergency services. The incident provided a compelling case study for examining human-wildlife interactions, risk assessment, and crisis management. Students in these programs studied the attack as an example of how multiple factors could combine to create dangerous situations. The documentary about the attack was eventually translated into multiple languages and distributed internationally, spreading awareness about brown bear safety to hunters and outdoor enthusiasts worldwide. The film's impact extended beyond its educational value to influence tourism patterns, with some potential visitors to Alaska deciding to avoid bear habitats, while others sought additional safety training before traveling to the region. 7 years after the attack, Jason made the decision to return to brown bear hunting, choosing to confront his fears and reclaim his passion for the activity that had nearly killed him. His return to hunting was carefully planned and executed with extensive safety precautions, including hiring the most experienced guides available and using the largest caliber firearms practical. Jason's successful harvest of a mature brown bear marked a significant milestone in his psychological recovery. Kevin's children, now teenagers, had developed their own relationships with the outdoors despite the traumatic loss of their father. Sarah had carefully balanced their exposure to hunting and fishing activities, ensuring they maintained positive associations with their father's passions, while understanding the inherent risks involved. The family's approach to outdoor recreation emphasized safety and preparation while honoring Kevin's memory. The scientific research community continued studying various aspects of the attack, with new findings regularly published in academic journals. The comprehensive documentation of the incident provided researchers with detailed data about brown bear attack dynamics, weapon effectiveness, and medical treatment outcomes. This research contributed to improved safety recommendations and emergency response protocols. Wildlife authorities throughout North America had incorporated lessons from the Kodiak attack into their management policies and public education programs. The incident demonstrated the importance of understanding individual animal behavior patterns rather than relying solely on species-wide generalizations. Exceptionally large or dominant animals might display significantly different behavioral patterns that required modified safety approaches. The attack site had returned to its natural state, with vegetation recovery masking most physical evidence of the violent encounter. However, the location remained significant to the survivors and had become part of the broader narrative about human-wildlife interactions in Alaska. Wildlife researchers occasionally visited the site to study ongoing bear activity patterns and environmental changes. 8 years after the attack, Marcus completed a book manuscript detailing his experience and the lessons learned from the incident. The book, titled When Giants Walk: Surviving Alaska's Deadliest Bear Attack, provided his personal account of the attack and its aftermath. Marcus hoped that sharing his story would help other hunters understand the psychological impacts of traumatic events and the importance of seeking appropriate support. The book's publication was scheduled to coincide with the anniversary of the attack, with proceeds designated for wildlife conservation organizations and trauma counseling programs. Marcus's military background provided him with unique perspectives on processing trauma and maintaining functionality following catastrophic events. His account emphasized the importance of preparation, teamwork, and mental resilience in surviving dangerous situations. Tom's contributions to guide safety training had influenced an entire generation of Alaska hunting guides, with many young professionals crediting his instruction with improving their understanding of risk assessment and emergency response. His reputation within the guiding community remained strong despite his forced retirement from active fieldwork. Tom's legacy included not only his successful career as a guide, but also his contributions to improving industry safety standards. David's evolution from hunting guide to wilderness photographer reflected his changed perspective on human-wildlife interactions following the attack. His photography work focused on capturing the beauty and power of Alaska's wildlife while promoting conservation messages and safety awareness. David's images and accompanying narratives helped educate the public about the importance of respecting wildlife and maintaining appropriate distances. The insurance industry's response to the attack had created lasting changes in how outdoor recreation risks were assessed and managed. New policy structures required detailed safety plans, equipment specifications, and training documentation before coverage would be provided for dangerous game hunting expeditions. These requirements had improved overall safety standards while increasing the complexity and cost of organizing such activities. 9 years after the attack, the survivors reflected on how the experience had fundamentally altered their life trajectories and relationships with the natural world. While the trauma had created lasting challenges for all involved, each man had found ways to extract meaning and purpose from their experience. Their shared survival had created bonds that transcended the geographic distances and different paths their lives had taken. Jason's recovery had inspired others facing similar challenges, with his story becoming a source of hope for trauma survivors throughout Alaska and beyond. His decision to return to hunting despite his injuries demonstrated remarkable courage and determination. Jason's experience had taught him that life's most meaningful experiences often involved accepting calculated risks while taking appropriate precautions. The attack's influence on Alaska's hunting industry remained evident in equipment selections, safety protocols, and training requirements that could be traced directly to lessons learned from the incident. New hunters entering the sport received education that included detailed analysis of the Kodiak attack and its implications for personal safety. The incident had become an integral part of Alaska's hunting culture and institutional knowledge. Kevin's memory continued to influence his family and community 9 years after his death. His children had grown into young adults who carried forward his passion for the outdoors while understanding the importance of safety and preparation. The scholarship program established in Kevin's name had supported dozens of young Alaskans pursuing careers in wildlife biology and outdoor education. 10 years after the attack, the incident remained a significant reference point for discussions about wilderness safety and human-wildlife interactions. The detailed documentation of the encounter continued to provide valuable data for researchers, educators, and safety professionals. The attack had demonstrated both the unpredictability of wildlife encounters and the importance of proper preparation and response protocols. The survivors' annual commemoration of Kevin's death had evolved into a broader celebration of life and reflection on the importance of friendship and mutual support during difficult times. Each year's gathering provided an opportunity to assess their ongoing recovery and maintain the bonds forged through their shared traumatic experience. The meetings had become an important source of strength and healing for all participants. The exceptional brown bear that had attacked the hunting party was eventually recognized by wildlife biologists as one of the largest specimens ever documented on Kodiak Island. The bear's mounted skull and hide were eventually donated to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game for educational purposes, where they served to illustrate the incredible size and power of Kodiak brown bears. The display included information about the attack and safety lessons learned from the incident, The comprehensive investigation of the attack had resulted in numerous improvements to hunting safety regulations, guide training requirements, and emergency response protocols throughout Alaska. These changes had likely prevented additional tragedies by improving preparation standards and response capabilities. The attack's legacy included not only the tragic loss of Kevin Holt, but also meaningful improvements to wilderness safety practices. Research initiated following the attack continued producing new insights into brown bear behavior, with particular focus on factors that contributed to aggressive encounters with humans. The findings had influenced wildlife management policies and public education programs throughout North America. The scientific community's interest in the incident demonstrated the value of thoroughly documenting and analyzing unusual wildlife encounters. The medical community had incorporated lessons learned from treating the attack survivors into training programs for emergency medicine residents and trauma surgeons. The comprehensive documentation of injuries and treatment protocols had improved understanding of brown bear attack patterns and optimal medical responses. Dr. Foster's trauma team had become recognized experts in treating dangerous wildlife attack victims. 15 years after the attack, the survivors continued their annual gatherings to honor Kevin's memory and support each other through ongoing challenges. The meetings had become deeply meaningful rituals that provided stability and connection despite the passage of time. Each year brought new perspectives on their shared experience and its continuing influence on their lives. Jason had achieved a remarkable recovery, returning to an active lifestyle that included hunting, fishing, and outdoor photography. His experience had made him a sought-after speaker for hunting safety seminars and trauma recovery programs. Jason's message emphasized the importance of proper preparation while acknowledging that some risks could never be completely eliminated from wilderness activities. Tom's contributions to guide safety training had influenced thousands of hunting professionals throughout his career. His detailed knowledge of the attack and its lessons had been incorporated into training materials used throughout Alaska and other regions with dangerous wildlife populations. Tom's legacy included both his successful guiding career and his significant contributions to industry safety improvements. Marcus had successfully processed his trauma through a combination of professional counseling and peer support from other veterans who had experienced combat-related psychological injuries. His book about the attack had become required reading in several university programs focused on wildlife management and outdoor recreation. Marcus continued working as a firearms instructor while advocating for mental health support for trauma survivors. David's transition from hunting guide to wildlife photographer had been professionally successful, with his work appearing in major outdoor publications and conservation campaigns. His photographs of Alaska's wildlife helped educate the public about conservation issues while promoting safe and respectful wildlife viewing practices. David's experience during the attack had provided him with unique insights into wildlife behavior and human-animal interactions. 20 years after the attack, the incident remained a significant case study in wildlife management and outdoor recreation safety literature. New generations of hunters, guides, and wildlife professionals learned about the attack and its implications for personal safety and risk management. The comprehensive documentation of the encounter continued providing valuable educational material for training programs worldwide. The survivors, now in their 60s, reflected on how the attack had shaped their adult lives and influenced their perspectives on mortality, friendship, and the natural world. While the trauma had created lasting challenges, each man had found ways to extract meaning from their experience and contribute to improving safety for others who chose to pursue adventures in wild places. Kevin's children had grown into successful adults who honored their father's memory through their own relationships with the outdoors. Sarah had remarried and built a new life while maintaining the scholarship program and memorial activities that kept Kevin's memory alive. The family's approach to processing their loss had provided a model for other families dealing with traumatic deaths. The exceptional brown bear that had attacked the hunting party was remembered not as a monster, but as a magnificent example of the power and unpredictability of Alaska's wildlife. The incident had reinforced the importance of respecting wild animals while pursuing outdoor recreation activities. The bear's size and behavior had contributed to scientific understanding of brown bear ecology and behavior patterns. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game continued using the attack as a case study in their hunter education programs and guide training courses. The incident provided a compelling example of how multiple factors could combine to create dangerous situations, while also demonstrating the importance of proper preparation and response protocols. The detailed documentation of the encounter had become an invaluable educational resource. The attack's influence on hunting equipment design and selection remained evident decades later, with ammunition manufacturers and firearms companies citing the incident in their marketing materials for dangerous game hunting products. The encounter had demonstrated the importance of adequate firepower and proper shot placement when dealing with exceptionally large and aggressive animals. Equipment recommendations developed after the attack continued influencing hunters' gear selections. The medical protocols developed for treating brown bear attack victims had been adopted by trauma centers throughout Alaska and other regions with dangerous wildlife populations. Dr. Foster's trauma team had trained dozens of medical professionals in these specialized treatment approaches, potentially saving lives in subsequent wildlife attack incidents. The medical legacy of the attack included improved understanding of trauma patterns and optimal treatment strategies. Insurance industry changes implemented after the attack had created lasting improvements in risk assessment and management practices for outdoor recreation activities. The comprehensive analysis of factors contributing to the incident had resulted in more sophisticated risk models and safety requirements that had likely prevented additional tragedies. The insurance industry's response demonstrated how thoroughly analyzing catastrophic events could lead to meaningful risk reduction improvements. The scientific research community's continued interest in the attack had produced numerous studies examining various aspects of human-wildlife interactions and brown bear behavior. The detailed documentation of the encounter had provided researchers with valuable data for understanding predator attack dynamics and developing improved safety recommendations. The research legacy of the attack included contributions to wildlife biology, emergency medicine, and risk management disciplines. 25 years after the attack, the survivors continued their annual commemoration of Kevin's death, though advancing age had made travel more difficult for some participants. The gatherings remained important sources of mutual support and connection, providing opportunities to process their shared experience and maintain the friendships forged through trauma. The meetings had evolved into multi-generational events that included family members and friends who helped maintain Kevin's memory. The attack site had long since returned to its natural state, with no visible evidence remaining of the violent encounter that had occurred decades earlier. Wildlife cameras placed in the area continued documenting normal bear activity patterns, indicating that the location had not been permanently altered by the incident. The site remained significant primarily in the memories of those who had survived the encounter. Educational institutions throughout Alaska and other regions continued incorporating the Kodiak attack into their curriculum for wildlife management, emergency services, and outdoor recreation programs. The incident provided a compelling case study for examining risk assessment, crisis management, and human-wildlife interactions. Students studying these disciplines learned valuable lessons from the detailed analysis of the attack and its aftermath. The documentary about the attack remained available through various media platforms and continued reaching new audiences interested in wildlife safety and survival stories. The film's educational value had been enhanced by updates that included information about long-term outcomes for the survivors and lessons learned from subsequent research. The documentary's ongoing availability helped ensure that safety messages from the incident continued reaching new generations of outdoor enthusiasts. 30 years after the attack, the incident had become part of Alaska's historical record and cultural narrative about human interactions with the state's wildlife. The story was included in books about Alaska history, hunting culture, and wildlife conservation, ensuring that future generations would learn about the encounter and its significance. The attack had transcended its immediate tragedy to become a source of lasting lessons about wilderness safety and survival. The survivors, now elderly men, looked back on the attack as a defining moment that had shaped their adult lives in both positive and challenging ways. While the trauma had created lasting difficulties, each man had found ways to extract meaning from their experience and contribute to improving safety for others pursuing outdoor adventures. Their survival and subsequent contributions had created a legacy that extended far beyond the immediate tragedy. Jason's recovery had inspired countless others facing similar challenges, demonstrating that it was possible to overcome severe trauma and return to meaningful, active lives. His speaking engagements and written accounts had helped educate hunters about safety while providing hope to trauma survivors. Jason's legacy included both his personal courage in recovery and his contributions to improving wilderness safety practices. Tom's influence on guide safety training had shaped an entire generation of Alaska hunting guides, many of whom credited his instruction with improving their understanding of risk management and emergency response. His detailed knowledge of the attack and its lessons had been incorporated into training materials used throughout North America. Tom's professional legacy included both his successful guiding career and his significant contributions to industry safety standards. Marcus's journey from military service through trauma recovery to advocacy for mental health support had provided a model for other veterans and trauma survivors. His book about the attack had become a recognized resource for understanding the psychological impacts of life-threatening encounters and the importance of seeking appropriate support. Marcus's advocacy work had helped improve the next stories. Grizzly bear kills whole family in cabin. June 14th, 2024. The morning mist hung heavy over Flathead Lake as John Carter guided his silver Ford F-150 down the winding gravel road toward their family's remote cabin in the Whitefish Range of northwestern Montana. It was 6:47 a.m. on June 14th, 2024, and the GPS showed they were still 12 miles from their destination deep in the Kootenai National Forest. His wife Melissa sat in the passenger seat, her auburn hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, reviewing the grocery list on her phone one final time before they lost cell service completely. In the back seat, 10-year-old Emily pressed her face against the window, watching for wildlife, while 7-year-old Ryan clutched his stuffed bear, ironically named Smokey, and complained about the bumpy ride. John Matthew Carter was a 38-year-old mechanical engineer from Missoula who had inherited the cabin from his grandfather, William Carter, a former Forest Service ranger who had built the structure with his own hands in 1967. The cabin sat on 40 acres of pristine wilderness, accessible only by a single dirt road that became impassable during heavy snow. John's grandfather had chosen this location specifically because it was far from civilization, surrounded by dense lodgepole pine and Douglas fir forests that provided perfect habitat for Montana's abundant wildlife, including one of the state's most robust grizzly bear populations. Melissa Ann Carter, 35, worked as a pediatric nurse at Community Medical Center in Missoula. She had married John 12 years earlier after meeting him at a hiking club event near Glacier National Park. Melissa had grown up in suburban Denver and initially felt uncomfortable with Montana's wilderness. But over the years, she had learned to appreciate the raw beauty and solitude their annual cabin trips provided. She was an experienced outdoorswoman now, having completed wilderness first aid training and obtained her concealed carry permit, though she rarely carried her Smith & Wesson .38 Special during family outings. Emily Rose Carter was a fourth grader at Hawthorne Elementary who excelled in science and dreamed of becoming a marine biologist, despite living hundreds of miles from the nearest ocean. She had inherited her father's analytical mind and her mother's compassionate nature, often rescuing injured birds and insects she found around their Missoula home. Emily loved the cabin trips because they gave her opportunities to observe wildlife up close and practice the photography skills she was developing with the Canon camera John had given her for her 10th birthday 3 months earlier. Ryan James Carter was an energetic second grader who struggled with attention deficit disorder but found peace in nature. The wilderness seemed to calm his hyperactive tendencies, and he could spend hours sitting quietly by the lake watching fish jump or eagles soar overhead. Ryan's medications were carefully packed in Melissa's medical bag, along with his emergency inhaler for the mild asthma that sometimes flared up at higher elevations. The Carter family had been making this trip to the cabin every June for the past 8 years, establishing it as their most cherished tradition. They would spend 2 weeks disconnected from technology, hiking the surrounding trails, fishing in nearby streams, and simply enjoying each other's company away from the distractions of modern life. John typically took vacation time from his job at Morrison Mile Engineering, while Melissa arranged for extended time off from the hospital. The children looked forward to these trips all year, counting down the days on their bedroom calendars. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the temperature dropped from the valley's comfortable 72 degrees to a crisp 58 degrees. John noted that the snowpack in the high country was heavier than usual this year due to an exceptionally harsh winter that had extended well into May. Local weather stations had recorded over 400 inches of snow in the high elevations, nearly twice the historical average. This meant that bears emerging from hibernation would be finding their traditional food sources still buried under snow, potentially forcing them to venture into lower elevations in search of sustenance. At 7:23 a.m., they passed the last cell tower, and Melissa's phone displayed no service as they entered the dead zone that surrounded their cabin. John had installed a satellite phone in the cabin 3 years earlier after Melissa expressed concerns about being completely cut off from emergency services, but they rarely used it except to check in with elderly relatives who worried about their remote adventures. The satellite phone was mounted on the kitchen wall next to a detailed topographical map of the area that John's grandfather had annotated with handwritten notes about game trails, water sources, and dangerous terrain. The gravel road narrowed as it wound through increasingly dense forest. Towering ponderosa pines created a natural canopy that blocked much of the morning sunlight, casting the road in perpetual twilight. John navigated carefully around the numerous potholes and washouts created by spring runoff, his truck's suspension creaking with each impact. They passed several primitive campsites that appeared to have been recently occupied, evidenced by cold fire rings and scattered garbage that made Melissa shake her head in disgust at people's disregard for leave-no-trace principles. At mile marker 7 on the Forest Service Road, they encountered their first wildlife of the trip when a small herd of white-tailed deer bounded across their path, their white tails flashing as they disappeared into the underbrush. Emily immediately grabbed her camera and managed to capture several shots of the deer mid-leap. though she worried the images might be blurry due to the truck's movement. Ryan pressed his face against the window and counted aloud as each deer crossed, reaching 11 before the last doe vanished into the trees. The road climbed steadily through what locals called Bear Valley, though John had never shared with his family the origin of that name. His grandfather had told him stories about the area's grizzly population, including several close encounters William had experienced during his years as a ranger. The valley had earned its name in the 1950s after a series of bear incidents, including a fatal mauling in 1954 that had prompted temporary closure of the area to recreational use. William Carter's detailed journals, stored in the cabin's bedroom closet, documented dozens of bear sightings over the decades, including a massive male grizzly he had nicknamed Scarface due to distinctive facial markings from what appeared to be claw wounds from territorial fights. By 8:15 a.m., they reached the turnoff to their private road, marked only by a faded wooden sign reading Carter Property, No Trespassing, that John repainted every few years. The private road was even rougher than the Forest Service route, having received no maintenance since John had hired a local contractor to grade it 3 summers ago. Tree branches scraped against the truck's sides as they navigated the increasingly narrow path, and John made a mental note to clear the overhanging vegetation during their stay. The cabin came into view at 8:31 a.m., nestled in a small clearing surrounded by towering evergreens. The structure was a traditional log cabin design, measuring 24 feet by 36 feet, with a steep metal roof to shed heavy snow loads. A covered porch ran along the front of the building, supported by massive log posts that John's grandfather had selected from the largest trees on the property. The cabin's chinking needed attention, John noted, as several gaps had opened up between the logs where the traditional mortar and moss filling had weathered away over the winter. William Carter had built the cabin to last, using traditional construction techniques learned from old-timers who had homesteaded in the area during the early 1900s. The foundation consisted of large stones quarried from a nearby hillside and set without mortar, allowing the building to flex with ground movement during freeze-thaw cycles. The walls were constructed from lodgepole pine logs that William had cut, peeled, and seasoned himself, creating a structure that had weathered nearly 6 decades of harsh Montana winters without significant deterioration. The interior of the cabin was spartanly furnished but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main living area. The kitchen occupied one corner, equipped with a propane-powered refrigerator, stove, and water heater connected to a hand-dug well that William had excavated using nothing but picks and shovels. 2 bedrooms were separated from the main area by walls constructed from salvaged barn wood, creating cozy sleeping quarters that stayed warm even during the coldest nights when heated by the massive fireplace. As John parked the truck near the cabin's front porch, Melissa noticed immediately that the wooden steps had suffered damage over the winter. The top step was cracked nearly in half, and deep gouges in the wood appeared to be claw marks. John examined the damage, while the children explored the immediate area around the cabin, finding several more sets of claw marks on the porch posts and what appeared to be bite marks on the wooden railing. The marks were fresh, likely made within the past few weeks, based on the clean appearance of the exposed wood. "Looks like we had some visitors over the winter," John commented, running his fingers along the deep gouges in the porch post. The marks were spaced wide apart and penetrated nearly an inch into the solid pine, indicating an animal of considerable size and strength. Melissa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air, as she realized the implications of finding such extensive damage to their previously undisturbed retreat. Emily discovered additional evidence of animal activity when she found several large piles of scat near the cabin's north wall. The droppings were massive, easily 6 inches long and 3 inches in diameter, filled with partially digested berries, fur, and what appeared to be small bones. She called her parents over to examine the find, and John's expression grew serious as he recognized the unmistakable signs of grizzly bear presence. The scat was relatively fresh, probably deposited within the past week, based on its condition and the lack of significant weather since the last storm system had passed through the area. The family began unloading their supplies from the truck at 8:45 a.m., with John making multiple trips to carry their food stores, camping equipment, and personal belongings into the cabin. They had packed enough provisions for their planned 2-week stay, including a week's worth of fresh food that would need immediate refrigeration and a backup supply of canned and dried goods stored in bear-proof containers. John's grandfather had taught him early about the importance of proper food storage in bear country, and the cabin was equipped with a heavy-duty steel cabinet specifically designed to keep curious wildlife away from human food. While John and Melissa organized their supplies, Emily and Ryan explored the cabin's interior with the excitement of children rediscovering a favorite toy after a long absence. Emily immediately claimed her preferred sleeping spot in the smaller bedroom, spreading her sleeping bag on the narrow bunk bed built into the wall. Ryan explored the main room, rediscovering the collection of board games, books, and jigsaw puzzles stored in a wooden chest that had provided entertainment during rainy days of previous visits. The cabin's windows provided panoramic views of the surrounding wilderness, with the main living area's large picture window facing west toward a meadow that attracted deer, elk, and other wildlife during the evening hours. John's grandfather had positioned the window specifically to provide optimal wildlife viewing opportunities, and the family had witnessed memorable encounters with black bears, mountain goats, and even a few grizzlies over the years, though always at a safe distance across the meadow. At 9:20 a.m., John noticed that the cabin's satellite phone was blinking with a message indicator. He accessed the voicemail system and found 3 messages from his neighbor, Robert Bob Mitchell, who owned a small ranch approximately 2 miles northeast of the Carter property. Bob was a 73-year-old retired logger who had lived in the area for over 40 years and served as an informal caretaker for several remote properties during the winter months when owners were absent. The first message, left on June 10th, was a routine check-in reporting that the cabin appeared secure and undamaged despite the harsh winter. The second message, dated June 12th, contained more concerning information about increased bear activity in the immediate area, including a large grizzly that Bob had observed multiple times near the Carter property boundaries. The third message, left just that morning at 6:15 a.m., was urgent in tone, as Bob reported finding fresh bear sign around the cabin and strongly recommended that the Carter family contact him immediately upon their arrival. John felt a knot forming in his stomach as he listened to Bob's increasingly concerned messages. Robert Mitchell was not an alarmist. His 4 decades in the Montana wilderness had given him an intimate understanding of wildlife behavior and a healthy respect for the dangers posed by large predators. If Bob was worried enough to leave multiple messages about bear activity, the situation was serious enough to warrant immediate attention and possibly a change in their vacation plans. Melissa noticed John's troubled expression as he hung up the satellite phone. When he explained Bob's messages, she immediately suggested they contact their neighbor to get more detailed information about the bear situation before deciding whether to stay or return to Missoula. Emily and Ryan, who had been eavesdropping on their parents' conversation, were disappointed by the possibility of cutting short their eagerly anticipated cabin trip, but they had been raised to respect their parents' judgment regarding safety matters. At 9:35 a.m., John dialed Bob Mitchell's number using the satellite phone. Bob answered on the second ring, his gravelly voice immediately conveying the seriousness of the situation. He explained that a large male grizzly, estimated to weigh between 600 and 700 pounds, had been actively patrolling the area around the Carter cabin for the past week. Bob had observed the bear on multiple occasions through his binoculars, noting aggressive territorial behavior and signs that the animal was actively seeking food sources rather than simply passing through the area. Bob Mitchell had moved to northwestern Montana in 1981 after spending his early career logging in Oregon and Washington. His ranch consisted of 80 acres of marginal grazing land that he used to raise a small herd of cattle and horses, supplementing his retirement income with seasonal work as a hunting guide and wilderness consultant. Bob's property included a small airstrip that he had carved from his pasture land, allowing him to provide emergency evacuation services for backcountry hikers and campers who found themselves in serious trouble miles from the nearest road. Over the decades, Bob had developed an almost supernatural ability to read animal behavior and predict dangerous situations before they escalated. His reputation among local law enforcement and wildlife officials had earned him consulting work with Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and he frequently assisted with problem wildlife situations throughout the region. Bob's assessments were taken seriously by professionals who recognized his expertise exceeded that of many university-trained biologists when it came to practical wilderness survival and animal behavior. During their phone conversation, Bob described the grizzly he had been monitoring as unusually aggressive and persistent in its investigation of human habitation. The bear had spent considerable time examining the Carter cabin, leaving extensive claw marks and scent markings that indicated territorial claiming behavior rather than casual curiosity. Most concerning was Bob's observation that the bear appeared to be a mature male in prime condition, meaning it would be confident, powerful, and potentially dangerous if it felt threatened or if its claimed territory was invaded. Bob strongly advised the Carter family to postpone their cabin stay until wildlife officials could assess the situation and potentially relocate the problem bear. He explained that early summer was mating season for grizzlies, making males particularly territorial and unpredictable, combined with the late spring that had delayed the emergence of natural food sources. Conditions were aligned for potentially dangerous human-bear encounters. Bob offered to contact Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks immediately to request an emergency assessment of the situation. John found himself torn between Bob's urgent warnings and his family's excitement about their long-planned vacation. The cabin represented their primary escape from the stresses of modern life, and they had been looking forward to this trip for months. Emily and Ryan had completed their school year and were counting on their wilderness adventure to kick off their summer vacation. Melissa had arranged her work schedule specifically to accommodate their 2-week absence, and changing their plans would create complications at the hospital, where several colleagues were also taking vacation time. At 9:52 a.m., John made the decision that would prove fatal for his entire family. Against Bob Mitchell's strong recommendations and his own growing instincts about the danger they faced, John decided they would stay at the cabin but take extra precautions to avoid attracting the bear's attention. He reasoned that they were experienced wilderness campers who understood bear safety protocols and that their 2-week investment in the trip outweighed the relatively small risk of a dangerous encounter. John assured Bob that they would be extremely careful about food storage, noise levels, and outdoor activities. He promised to maintain regular contact through the satellite phone and to evacuate immediately if they observed any signs of bear activity near the cabin. Bob reluctantly agreed to serve as their emergency contact and early warning system. But his final words before ending the call were prophetic. "John, I've been in these mountains longer than you've been alive, and I'm telling you, this bear is different. He's not going to be scared off by noise or lights or any of the usual tricks. You need to take your family and leave while you still can. The Carter family spent the remainder of the morning settling into their cabin routine, unpacking their belongings and organizing their supplies, according to bear-safe protocols that John had learned from his grandfather and reinforced through years of wilderness camping. All food items were stored in the steel bear cabinet or the propane-powered refrigerator, with nothing left in the truck or anywhere else that might attract unwanted attention. Toiletries, sunscreen, insect repellent, and other scented items were also secured in the bear-proof storage system. Emily and Ryan helped their parents organize the cabin while eagerly planning their activities for the coming days. Emily wanted to hike to Mirror Lake, approximately 3 miles northeast of the cabin, where she hoped to photograph the waterfowl that nested in the area during summer months. Ryan was excited about fishing in Beaver Creek, a small stream that ran through a meadow about half a mile south of their property, where John had taught him to cast for native brook trout during previous visits. At 11:15 a.m., Melissa prepared lunch using supplies from their cooler, creating sandwiches from fresh bread, deli meat and cheese that would need to be consumed quickly in the high-altitude environment where food spoiled faster than at sea level. The family ate on the cabin's front porch, enjoying the mountain air and spectacular views while discussing their plans for the afternoon. The weather was perfect for outdoor activities, with clear skies, light winds, and temperatures climbing into the comfortable mid-60s. John suggested they begin their stay with a short hike to reacquaint themselves with the immediate area and to check the condition of the trails they planned to use during their extended stay. The family's favorite walk was a gentle 2-mile loop that began behind the cabin, circled through a stand of old-growth Douglas fir trees, past a small waterfall, and returned via a meadow where they often observed wildlife during the golden hours of early morning and late evening. At 11:45 a.m., the Carter family began their first hike of the trip, with John leading the way along the familiar trail that started behind their cabin. Emily carried her camera in a padded case, hoping to add to her collection of wilderness photographs that she planned to enter in her school's science fair next fall. Ryan brought along his binoculars, a compact pair that John had given him for his 7th birthday, and a small notebook where he recorded his wildlife observations in careful printing. The trail behind the cabin was well established, having been used by hunters and hikers for decades before John's grandfather purchased the property. William Carter had maintained the path meticulously, clearing fallen trees and marking difficult passages with small cairns that helped hikers navigate during periods of poor visibility. The trail gained approximately 400 feet of elevation over its 2-mile length, providing excellent cardiovascular exercise without being too strenuous for children. As they walked, John pointed out various landmarks and natural features that his grandfather had taught him to recognize during his childhood visits to the cabin. A massive Douglas fir tree, easily 6 feet in diameter and over 200 years old, served as a landmark visible from multiple points along the trail. Several smaller trees bore old blaze marks created by William Carter to help hunters and hikers maintain their bearings in the dense forest, where it was easy to become disoriented. The forest was alive with early summer activity, as plants and animals took advantage of the brief growing season at their elevation of nearly 5,000 feet above sea level. Wildflowers were beginning to bloom in small meadows and clearings, with Indian paintbrush, lupine and beargrass creating colorful displays against the dark green backdrop of evergreen trees. Emily photographed several flower clusters, experimenting with her camera's macro lens to capture intricate details of petals and leaves. At 12:20 p.m., approximately half a mile from the cabin, Ryan spotted their first wildlife of the hike when he noticed a red squirrel chattering angrily from a pine tree branch about 15 feet above the trail. The squirrel's agitated behavior seemed unusual, as these animals typically ignored passing hikers unless they were defending a cache of pine cones or nuts. John paused to observe the squirrel more carefully, noting that its tail was bristled and its vocalizations seemed to be warning calls rather than territorial announcements. Emily raised her binoculars to get a better look at the squirrel and noticed that several other small animals in the area appeared agitated. A pair of grey jays that had been calling back and forth across the canyon suddenly fell silent and disappeared into the dense canopy. Even the ever-present sound of insects seemed muted compared to the usual buzz of activity they expected in the warm afternoon air. The forest felt different, though none of the family members could articulate exactly what had changed. John's wilderness experience told him that when multiple animal species simultaneously displayed stress behaviors, it usually indicated the presence of a large predator in the immediate area. His grandfather had taught him to read these subtle signs that often provided early warning of dangerous situations. William Carter's journals contain detailed observations about animal behavior patterns that preceded bear encounters, including the sudden silence that seemed to envelop the forest when a grizzly was moving through the area. Despite his growing uneasiness, John decided to continue their hike while remaining more alert to their surroundings. He quietly advised Melissa and the children to stay close together and to speak in normal tones rather than whispering, as bears could interpret hushed voices as the sounds of prey animals. John also began making periodic loud comments about their surroundings, following the standard practice of providing audio warnings to bears that might be in the area but unaware of human presence. At 12:35 p.m., they reached the small waterfall that marked the halfway point of their loop trail. The waterfall was created by Deer Creek as it tumbled over a 15-foot rock ledge, creating a misty spray that supported lush vegetation, including ferns, mosses, and wildflowers that thrived in the increased humidity. The sound of falling water had always been one of Emily's favorite aspects of this hike, and she immediately began photographing the cascade from multiple angles. Ryan discovered a small pool at the base of the waterfall where several species of insects skated across the surface tension, creating ripples that caught the afternoon sunlight. He crouched beside the pool with his notebook, carefully drawing pictures of the water striders and documenting their behavior in his precise second-grade handwriting. The boy's ability to sit quietly and observe nature had always impressed his parents, who recognized it as a valuable skill for anyone hoping to understand wildlife behavior. While Emily and Ryan explored the waterfall area, John and Melissa discussed their observations about the unusual animal behavior they had noticed during their hike. Melissa, with her medical training, was naturally cautious about potentially dangerous situations, and she suggested they consider cutting their hike short and returning to the cabin. John agreed that something felt different about the forest today, though he couldn't identify any specific threat that warranted immediate concern. At 12:50 p.m., as they prepared to continue their hike toward the meadow that completed their loop trail, Emily's sharp eyes spotted something that made her freeze in place. Approximately 30 yards ahead on the trail, she could see what appeared to be large paw prints in a muddy section where Deer Creek crossed the path. She quietly called her father over and pointed toward the tracks, her voice betraying the excitement and nervousness she felt at the discovery. John approached the muddy area carefully and immediately recognized the unmistakable prints of a large grizzly bear. The tracks were fresh, probably made within the past few hours, based on the sharp definition of the claw marks and pad impressions in the soft mud. The bear had been traveling in the same direction the family was hiking, and the spacing between prints indicated it was moving at a steady walk rather than running or charging, suggesting it was patrolling its territory rather than fleeing from a threat. The size of the tracks was alarming even to John's experienced eye, The front paw prints measured nearly 9 inches long and 6 inches wide, with claw marks extending an additional 4 inches beyond the pad impressions. The rear paw prints were even larger, measuring over 11 inches in length and indicating a bear of exceptional size and maturity. Based on the track measurements and his grandfather's teachings about estimating bear size from footprints, John calculated that they were dealing with a bear with an animal weighing between 600 and 700 pounds, precisely matching Bob Mitchell's description of the problem bear. Melissa's nursing instincts kicked in as she recognized the potential danger their family faced. She immediately began mentally inventorying their emergency supplies and escape routes while maintaining a calm demeanor to avoid frightening Emily and Ryan. The children were fascinated by the bear tracks and wanted to photograph them and measure their dimensions, but Melissa firmly redirected their attention toward returning to the cabin as quickly and safely as possible. At 1:05 p.m., John made the crucial decision to abort their hike and return to the cabin via the most direct route available. Rather than completing their planned loop, which would have taken them through an open meadow where visibility was good but escape routes were limited, he decided they should backtrack along the trail they had already traveled. This route would keep them in dense forest, where they could quickly climb trees if necessary, though John hoped it wouldn't come to that desperate measure. The return hike to the cabin took on an entirely different character as the family moved quickly but quietly along the familiar trail. John took the lead position, constantly scanning ahead for movement while Melissa brought up the rear to ensure no one fell behind. Emily and Ryan, sensing the seriousness of the situation despite their parents' efforts to remain calm, stayed close together and spoke in whispers when they needed to communicate. The forest seemed even quieter during their return journey, with an oppressive silence that made their footsteps and breathing seem unnaturally loud. John found himself jumping at sounds that would normally go unnoticed: the crack of a dry branch underfoot, the rustle of wind in the treetops, the distant call of a bird. His grandfather had described this heightened sensory awareness as a natural response to danger, an evolutionary adaptation that had helped humans survive in environments filled with large predators. At 1:25 p.m., they encountered their first direct evidence that the bear was actively following their movements. At a point where the trail curved around a large boulder, John discovered fresh scat that hadn't been present during their outbound hike less than an hour earlier. The droppings were still warm to the touch and contained partially digested berries that appeared to be huckleberries, indicating the bear had been feeding in the immediate area very recently. More disturbing than the fresh scat was the discovery of claw marks on several trees adjacent to the trail. The marks were high on the trunks, at least 8 feet above ground level, demonstrating the bear's impressive size and reach. Some of the marks appeared to be territorial markings made by raking claws down the bark, while others looked like the bear had been testing its climbing ability or simply venting frustration through destructive behavior. John's wilderness experience told him they were being stalked by an intelligent predator that was aware of their presence and movements. Grizzly bears possess excellent vision, hearing, and an extraordinary sense of smell that allows them to track humans from considerable distances. The bear's behavior suggested it was following them deliberately rather than simply happening to use the same trail system, a realization that filled John with a cold dread he had never experienced during decades of wilderness travel. The final half-mile to the cabin felt like the longest distance John had ever walked. Every shadow could conceal a massive predator. Every sound might herald an attack. Every moment stretched with agonizing tension as they forced themselves to maintain steady progress without breaking into a panicked run that could trigger the bear's chase instincts. John's grandfather had always emphasized that running from a grizzly bear was the worst possible response, as these animals could reach speeds of 35 miles per hour and were naturally programmed to pursue fleeing prey. At 1:40 p.m., the Carter family reached their cabin with overwhelming relief. though John realized their safety was only temporary. The building offered protection from direct attack, but it wasn't designed to withstand a determined assault by a large bear. The windows were single-pane glass that could be easily broken. The doors were solid but hung on hinges that weren't designed to resist the tremendous force a grizzly could exert. And the log walls, while substantial, contained gaps where the chinking had weathered away over the decades. John immediately contacted Bob Mitchell using the satellite phone to report their encounter with the bear tracks and request immediate assistance from wildlife authorities. Bob's reaction was swift and decisive. He would contact Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks immediately and request emergency response to the Carter property. He also offered to drive over to their cabin himself, bringing his rifle and additional emergency supplies, but John declined the offer, not wanting to put their elderly neighbor at risk. Bob Mitchell placed his emergency call to Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks at 1:47 p.m., reaching the dispatcher for the Kalispell Regional Office. He explained the situation in detail, emphasizing the immediate danger posed by a large male grizzly that was actively stalking a family with young children at a remote cabin location. The dispatcher, Sarah Chen, was a 15-year veteran of wildlife emergency calls who immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation Bob was describing. Sarah Chen dispatched wildlife biologist Dr. Marcus Thompson and game warden Jake Rodriguez to the Carter cabin location with instructions to assess the bear threat and take appropriate action to protect the family. Dr. Thompson was a 23-year veteran of Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, who had handled hundreds of bear encounters throughout his career, including several fatal attacks. Jake Rodriguez was a former Marine who had joined the Game Warden Service 5 years earlier and specialized in dangerous wildlife situations. The emergency response team faced a significant challenge in reaching the Carter cabin due to its remote location and the rough access road that was barely passable even with four-wheel drive vehicles. Dr. Thompson and Jake Rodriguez departed from the Kalispell office at 2:15 p.m. in a specially equipped pickup truck that carried bear traps, immobilization equipment, emergency medical supplies, and heavy-caliber rifles designed for stopping large, dangerous game. While waiting for the wildlife authorities to arrive, the Carter family secured their cabin as thoroughly as possible. John checked all windows and doors, ensuring they were properly latched, while Melissa gathered their emergency supplies in case they needed to evacuate quickly. Emily and Ryan helped by staying out of the way and keeping watch through the windows for any signs of the bear's approach, though John instructed them to stay back from the glass in case the animal decided to investigate the cabin more aggressively. At 2:30 p.m., Emily spotted movement at the edge of the forest clearing surrounding their cabin. She called quietly to her father, who approached the window carefully and confirmed her sighting. A massive grizzly bear had emerged from the tree line approximately 50 yards from their building. The animal was even larger than John had estimated from its tracks, with a distinctive light-colored coat that appeared almost blonde in the afternoon sunlight, and a massive hump of muscle above its shoulders that indicated exceptional strength and maturity. The bear's behavior was unlike anything John had witnessed during previous wildlife encounters at the cabin. Rather than passing through the area or showing curiosity followed by departure, this animal seemed to be conducting a systematic investigation of the human habitation. It approached to within 20 yards of the cabin, stood on its hind legs to peer through windows, and circled the building while sniffing intensely at the foundation, porch, and any other areas where human scent might have accumulated. John quietly moved his family away from the windows as the bear's investigation became more aggressive. The animal began testing the porch steps with its front paws, placing significant weight on the damaged boards they had noticed that morning. The wood creaked ominously under the bear's massive bulk, and John realized that the damage they had attributed to winter weather was actually the result of previous visits by this same animal. At 2:45 p.m., the grizzly's behavior escalated from investigation to territorial claiming as it began marking the area around the cabin with scent. The bear rubbed against porch posts, leaving behind patches of fur and natural oils that would advertise its presence to other wildlife in the area. More alarmingly, it began making vocalizations that John recognized from his grandfather's descriptions as aggressive territorial warnings, deep woofing sounds accompanied by jaw popping and huffing that indicated high stress and potential for violence. Melissa used the satellite phone to maintain contact with Bob Mitchell, providing him with regular updates about the bear's behavior that he could relay to the approaching wildlife response team. Bob's experience with grizzly behavior made him increasingly worried about the situation, as the animal's persistent interest in the cabin suggested it had already made the mental connection between human habitation and potential food sources. Dr. Marcus Thompson and Jake Rodriguez were making slow progress toward the Carter cabin due to the deteriorating condition of the access road. Spring runoff had created numerous washouts and muddy sections that required careful navigation even with their four-wheel drive vehicle. They estimated their arrival time at approximately 3:30 p.m., assuming they didn't encounter any insurmountable obstacles that would force them to continue on foot. At 3:10 p.m., the situation took a dramatic turn for the worse when the grizzly bear began actively testing the cabin's defenses. The animal approached the front door and began pushing against it with its massive paws, causing the entire structure to shake and creak under the applied pressure. John realized that the door's hinges and frame, while sturdy by normal standards, were not designed to withstand the tremendous force that a 700-pound bear could exert when motivated. The bear's investigation of the cabin's vulnerabilities continued for several minutes as it moved from the front door to the windows, pressing against the glass with its nose and paws, while making huffing sounds that fogged the surfaces. Emily and Ryan huddled with their mother in the cabin's smaller bedroom, while John remained in the main room, monitoring the animal's movements and maintaining radio contact with Bob Mitchell and the incoming response team. John's military training from his National Guard service began to assert itself as he recognized they were facing a potentially life-threatening situation that might require immediate defensive action. He retrieved his grandfather's .30-06 rifle from its locked case in the bedroom closet, though he hoped desperately that he wouldn't need to use it. The rifle was a Remington Model 700 that William Carter had purchased in 1965 and used for decades of elk hunting, keeping it in excellent condition with regular cleaning and maintenance. The .30-06 cartridge was considered adequate for grizzly bear defense by most experts, though many recommended larger calibers such as .338 Winchester Magnum or .338 Winchester Magnum, 375 H&H Magnum for situations involving large, aggressive bears. John had only the ammunition that his grandfather had stored with the rifle, a box of 20 rounds loaded with 180-grain soft-point bullets that would be effective on most North American game, but might not provide sufficient stopping power against a charging grizzly unless shot placement was perfect. At 3:20 p.m., the bear's behavior became increasingly aggressive as it began testing the cabin's structural integrity more forcefully. The animal reared up on its hind legs and placed its front paws against the main window, pressing hard enough to cause the glass to flex alarmingly. John realized that the window would not survive much more pressure and quietly moved his family toward the cabin's rear exit, preparing for the possibility that they might need to evacuate immediately. The rear door of the cabin opened onto a small porch that faced the beginning of their hiking trail, providing a potential escape route into the dense forest behind the building. However, John recognized that fleeing on foot would put his family at tremendous disadvantage against a bear that could outrun, outclimb, and overpower humans with ease. Their best hope lay in the imminent arrival of the wildlife response team with their specialized equipment and expertise. Bob Mitchell maintained constant communication with both the Carter family and the approaching response team, serving as a crucial link between the endangered family and their potential rescuers. His decades of experience with bear behavior allowed him to interpret the situation and provide advice about defensive strategies while Dr. Thompson and Jake Rodriguez navigated the treacherous access road to the remote cabin location. At 3:25 p.m., the grizzly bear's territorial behavior escalated to outright aggression as it began attacking the cabin's front porch. The animal used its powerful claws to tear at the wooden steps and railings, sending splinters flying while making deep, gouging wounds in the solid pine construction. The sound of splintering wood was accompanied by the bear's increasingly agitated vocalizations, creating a terrifying symphony that made it clear the animal was working itself into a rage. John made the critical decision to fire a warning shot using his grandfather's rifle, hoping that the loud noise would frighten the bear away from the cabin. He carefully opened a rear window and fired a single round into the air above the tree line, creating a thunderous crack that echoed across the valley. The gunshot had an immediate effect on the bear, which dropped to all fours and looked around alertly for the source of the threatening sound. For a moment, it appeared that John's warning shot had achieved its intended effect, as the grizzly backed away from the cabin and stood motionless in the clearing. The family held their breath, hoping that the animal would retreat into the forest and end their terrifying ordeal. However, their relief was short-lived, as the bear's reaction shifted from startled retreat to aggressive investigation of this new challenge to its claimed territory. Rather than fleeing from the gunshot, the grizzly began moving toward the rear of the cabin where John had fired the warning shot. The animal's body language indicated extreme agitation and potential for violent action as it approached the building with its ears laid back, head lowered, and muscles tensed for explosive movement. John realized that his warning shot had backfired spectacularly, transforming a territorial dispute into a direct confrontation with a predator that viewed them as threats to be eliminated. At 3:28 p.m., Dr. Marcus Thompson and Jake Rodriguez reached the beginning of the Carter Properties private access road, still approximately 2 miles from the cabin, but close enough to hear the gunshot that John had fired. They immediately contacted Bob Mitchell for an update on the situation and learned that the bear was actively attacking the cabin and the family was in immediate danger. Dr. Thompson made the decision to abandon their vehicle and continue on foot, carrying essential equipment including immobilization drugs and heavy rifles. The wildlife response team began running toward the cabin along the rough access road, hampered by their heavy equipment but driven by the urgent need to reach the endangered family. Dr. Thompson carried a Marlin Model 1895 rifle chambered in .45-70 government, a cartridge with sufficient power to stop a charging grizzly bear with proper shot placement. Jake Rodriguez carried a Remington Model 870 shotgun loaded with slugs, providing additional firepower if the situation required lethal force to protect human life. Back at the cabin, the grizzly bear had located the rear window where John had fired his warning shot and was now investigating it with intense interest. The animal reared up on its hind legs and pressed its massive paws against the glass, causing the window frame to creak and flex under the tremendous pressure. John realized that this window, like all the others in the cabin, would not withstand a determined assault by the enraged bear. Melissa gathered Emily and Ryan in the cabin's bathroom, the most interior space in the building and the location that offered the best protection from the bear if it succeeded in breaking into the main living areas. The bathroom had no windows and only one entrance, making it easier to defend, though John recognized that they would be trapped if the bear managed to corner them there. The family's options were rapidly diminishing as the animal's aggression continued to escalate. At 3:32 p.m., the inevitable happened as the grizzly bear's investigation of the rear window resulted in the glass giving way under pressure. The window shattered inward, sending fragments across the cabin's back bedroom and providing the bear with direct access to the building's interior. John positioned himself between his family and the breached window, raising his grandfather's rifle and preparing to make what might be the most important shots of his life. The bear's massive head appeared in the broken window frame as it began forcing its way into the cabin. The opening was barely large enough to accommodate the animal's enormous bulk, but grizzly bears are surprisingly agile and capable of squeezing through spaces that seem impossibly small for their size. John waited until he had a clear shot at the bear's head and neck area before firing, knowing that he would probably only get one opportunity to stop the animal before it reached his family. John's first shot struck the grizzly in the shoulder, causing it to roar with pain and rage, but failing to stop its advance into the cabin. The 180-grain bullet, while powerful enough to kill most animals, was insufficient to immediately incapacitate a bear of this size and determination. The wounded animal's aggression increased dramatically as it associated the pain with the human threats it was confronting, transforming what had been territorial behavior into a life-or-death struggle. The bear completed its entry into the cabin and immediately charged toward John, covering the distance between the window and his position in less than 2 seconds. John managed to fire a second shot as the animal approached, this bullet striking the bear in the chest, but again failing to achieve the immediate stopping power needed to prevent the attack. The grizzly's momentum carried it forward despite its wounds, and John found himself face to face with nearly 700 pounds of enraged predator. At 3:35 p.m., the bear's attack on John Carter began with devastating swiftness and violence. The animal's first swipe, with its massive front paw, caught John across the chest and shoulder, sending him crashing into the cabin's kitchen area where he struck the propane stove with tremendous force. The bear's claws, each over 4 inches long and razor-sharp, opened deep lacerations across John's torso that immediately began bleeding profusely. John's rifle flew from his hands and clattered across the cabin floor, coming to rest beneath the dining table where it would remain out of reach for the duration of the attack. Without his primary means of defense, John found himself completely helpless against the massive predator that had already demonstrated its ability to absorb significant gunshot wounds without being deterred from its aggressive assault. The grizzly bear followed up its initial attack by seizing John in its massive jaws, biting down on his head and neck area with tremendous force. A grizzly's bite generates over 1,200 pounds per square inch of pressure, easily sufficient to crush human bones and cause massive trauma to soft tissues. John's screams of pain and terror filled the cabin as the bear shook him like a dog worrying a toy, his body ragdolling under the tremendous forces being applied. Melissa Carter's nursing training and maternal instincts overcame her terror as she realized her husband was being killed before her eyes. She emerged from the bathroom where she had taken shelter with Emily and Ryan, desperately searching for some way to help John survive the savage mauling. The satellite phone on the kitchen wall offered the possibility of summoning help, but she knew that assistance was still minutes away, while her husband needed immediate intervention to survive. The bear released John from its jaws and began using its claws to inflict additional damage, raking its massive paws across his torso and limbs while making deep woofing vocalizations that indicated extreme agitation. John's blood spattered across the cabin's interior surfaces as the animal continued its methodical destruction of what it perceived as a territorial threat. His attempts to protect himself were futile against the bear's overwhelming size and strength advantage. Emily and Ryan remained hidden in the bathroom, listening to their father's screams and their mother's desperate attempts to find help. The children were experiencing psychological trauma that would affect them for the rest of their lives, assuming they survived the next few minutes. Emily clutched her stuffed animal, while Ryan pressed his hands over his ears, trying to block out the sounds of violence that no child should ever witness. At 3:37 p.m., Melissa made the fateful decision to try reaching the satellite phone to call for emergency medical assistance. She knew that John was dying from his wounds and that their only hope lay in getting professional medical help to their remote location as quickly as possible. However, reaching the phone required crossing the main room, where the bear was still attacking her husband, putting herself directly in the path of the enraged predator. Melissa's movement across the cabin floor immediately attracted the grizzly's attention, causing it to abandon its assault on John and focus on this new threat to its territorial claim. The bear's predatory instincts were fully engaged now, and it viewed any human movement as either a threat to be eliminated or prey to be captured. Melissa found herself facing the same overwhelming force that had already devastated her husband. The bear's attack on Melissa Carter was even more swift and decisive than its assault on John. The animal had learned from its previous encounter that humans could inflict pain with their weapons, and it moved to eliminate this new threat before she could access any means of defense. The grizzly's first blow knocked Melissa to the cabin floor with such force that her head struck the stone hearth of the fireplace, causing immediate unconsciousness and severe traumatic brain injury. John Carter, despite his massive injuries, attempted to crawl toward his wife to provide protection or assistance, but his wounds had caused severe blood loss, and his strength was rapidly failing. He managed to call out Melissa's name once before the bear returned its attention to him, delivering what would prove to be fatal injuries to his head and neck. The cabin floor was now slick with blood from both parents, creating a horrific scene that would haunt investigators for years to come. At 3:39 p.m., the sounds of violence in the main cabin area stopped abruptly as both John and Melissa Carter succumbed to their injuries. The bear, having eliminated what it perceived as the primary threats to its territory, began investigating the rest of the cabin for additional dangers or food sources. This investigation would inevitably lead it to discover Emily and Ryan Carter, who were still hidden in the bathroom and unaware that their parents were already dead. Dr. Marcus Thompson and Jake Rodriguez were still approximately half a mile from the cabin when they heard the final gunshots and subsequent screaming that marked the beginning of the fatal attack. They increased their pace despite the rough terrain and heavy equipment, knowing that every second of delay reduced the chances that they would find survivors when they reached the remote building. However, the distance and difficult terrain made it impossible for them to arrive in time to prevent the tragedy that was unfolding. The grizzly bear's investigation of the cabin continued as it used its exceptional sense of smell to locate the two children hidden in the bathroom. Bears can detect scents at concentrations nearly 100 times lower than humans can perceive, making it impossible for Emily and Ryan to remain concealed once the animal began actively searching for them. The bathroom door, while solid wood, was not designed to resist the tremendous force that a motivated grizzly bear could apply. Emily Carter, at 10 years old, displayed remarkable courage as she realized their hiding place had been discovered. She positioned herself between her 7-year-old brother and the bathroom door, preparing to sacrifice herself to give Ryan a few additional moments of life. Her final act was whispering to her brother that she loved him and that their parents were waiting for them in heaven, showing the same compassionate nature that had made her want to become a marine biologist. At 3:41 p.m., the grizzly bear broke down the bathroom door with a single powerful blow, gaining immediate access to the final 2 members of the Carter family. Emily and Ryan Carter died within seconds of each other, their small bodies no match for the tremendous force that had already killed their parents. The entire family had been eliminated in less than 6 minutes, making this attack one of the fastest multiple fatalities in Montana's recorded bear attack history. The cabin fell silent except for the sounds of the grizzly bear continuing its investigation of the scene and the distant voices of Dr. Thompson and Jake Rodriguez as they approached through the forest. The bear's territorial instincts were now fully satisfied, having eliminated all human presence from what it considered its domain. However, the animal's aggressive behavior had been reinforced by success, making it an ongoing threat to any other humans who might venture into its territory. Bob Mitchell had been monitoring radio communications between the Wildlife Response Team and emergency dispatch when the transmission suddenly stopped at 3:41 p.m. His attempts to contact the Carter family through their satellite phone went unanswered, and the ominous silence convinced him that the worst-case scenario had occurred. Bob immediately contacted the Flathead County Sheriff's Office to request additional emergency response resources, including medical personnel and a helicopter evacuation team. At 3:44 p.m., Dr. Marcus Thompson and Jake Rodriguez arrived at the edge of the clearing surrounding the Carter cabin, immediately observing the massive grizzly bear that was still present at the scene. The animal was covered in blood and showed obvious bullet wounds from John Carter's defensive shots, but it remained alert and aggressive. Dr. Thompson made the immediate decision that the bear posed too great a threat to allow any rescue operations to proceed, and both men raised their rifles to engage the animal. The grizzly bear detected the approach of the wildlife officers and immediately shifted into defensive posture, preparing to protect its claimed territory from these new intruders. The animal's previous success in eliminating human threats had reinforced its aggressive behavior, and it showed no inclination to retreat from the area it now considered its own. Dr. Thompson and Jake Rodriguez found themselves facing the same dangerous predator that had just killed an entire family. Jake Rodriguez fired the first shot using his Remington shotgun loaded with rifled slugs, striking the bear in the shoulder and causing it to stagger but not fall. The animal's response was immediate and violent as it charged toward the two men with surprising speed, despite its wounds. Dr. Thompson fired his .45-70 rifle, delivering a more powerful blow that finally brought the massive predator to the ground just 15 yards from their position. The grizzly bear died at 3:47 p.m. from the combination of gunshot wounds it had received from John Carter's defensive shots and the final shots fired by the Wildlife Response Team. Post-mortem examination would later reveal that the animal was a mature male weighing 687 pounds, making it one of the largest grizzlies ever recorded in the Flathead Valley region. The bear's size and exceptional physical condition explained its confidence and aggressive territorial behavior. With the immediate threat eliminated, Dr. Thompson and Jake Rodriguez approached the Carter cabin to assess the situation and provide whatever assistance might still be possible. However, the scene they encountered inside the building was beyond anything either man had witnessed during their combined 4 decades of wildlife management careers. The entire Carter family had been killed in what appeared to be a systematic attack that left no survivors. John Carter's body was discovered near the kitchen area, having suffered massive trauma to his head, neck, and torso. His wounds were consistent with both claw and bite marks from a large grizzly bear, and the blood loss was so extensive that survival would have been impossible even with immediate medical intervention. The defensive wounds on his arms and hands showed that he had fought desperately to protect his family until his strength failed. Melissa Carter was found near the fireplace, having suffered severe head trauma when the bear's attack caused her to strike the stone hearth. Her injuries included both blunt force trauma from the impact and massive lacerations from the bear's claws. Like her husband, she had died quickly from wounds that would have been unsurvivable even in a hospital setting with immediate surgical intervention. Emily and Ryan Carter were discovered in the bathroom where they had sought shelter during the attack. Both children had suffered massive trauma consistent with grizzly bear attacks, and their small bodies showed evidence of the tremendous force that had been applied during their final moments. The scene was so horrific that Jake Rodriguez, a combat veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, had to step outside the cabin to compose himself before continuing the investigation. At 4:15 p.m., Dr. Thompson used his radio to contact emergency dispatch and report that all 4 members of the Carter family had been killed in the bear attack. He requested immediate response from the Flathead County Coroner's Office, additional law enforcement personnel, and a helicopter to evacuate the bodies from the remote location. The magnitude of the tragedy began to sink in as he realized they were dealing with Montana's worst bear attack in recorded history. Sheriff Michael O'Brien of Flathead County received notification of the multiple fatalities at 4:22 p.m. and immediately dispatched his senior investigators to the scene. Detective Lieutenant Sarah Williams and Detective Sergeant Robert Bobby Harrison were veterans of homicide investigations, but neither had experience with wildlife attack fatalities of this magnitude. They would be responsible for documenting the scene, collecting evidence, and preparing reports for the inevitable media attention and legal proceedings that would follow. The Montana State Medical Examiner, Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, was notified of the incident at 4:30 p.m. and began making arrangements to transport the victim's remains to her facility in Missoula for comprehensive autopsies. The examinations would need to determine the exact cause of death for each family member, document their injuries in detail, and provide evidence that could be used in any legal proceedings related to the incident. Bob Mitchell arrived at the Carter property at 4:45 p.m., having driven his pickup truck as far as possible before continuing on foot through the forest. His 73-year-old body was pushed to its limits by the difficult terrain and his emotional distress over the tragedy that he had been unable to prevent. Bob blamed himself for not insisting more forcefully that the Carter family evacuate when he first warned them about the dangerous bear. The helicopter evacuation team from Kalispell Regional Medical Center arrived at 5:20 p.m., having been diverted from their original mission to respond to this emergency. The crew included flight nurse Patricia Chen, flight paramedic Michael Torres, and pilot Captain David Anderson, all of whom were veterans of wilderness rescue operations. However, their life-saving skills would not be needed today, as they had arrived too late to help any of the victims. Detective Lieutenant Sarah Williams began photographing the crime scene at 5:35 p.m., though she quickly realized that standard homicide investigation techniques were inadequate for documenting the complex evidence left by a bear attack. She consulted with Dr. Thompson and Jake Rodriguez to understand the animal behavior aspects of the incident, while ensuring that all physical evidence was properly preserved for the investigation and autopsy procedures. The process of removing the victims' bodies from the cabin required extreme care due to the extensive trauma they had suffered and the need to preserve evidence for the official investigation. Each body was photographed in place before being carefully placed in body bags for transport to the helicopter landing zone that had been established in the meadow behind the cabin. The helicopter crew made 4 separate flights to transport all the victims to the medical examiner's facility. News of the tragedy began spreading through the small Montana communities surrounding the Flathead Valley as word leaked from emergency responders and government officials who had been involved in the response. Local newspapers and television stations started gathering information for what would become one of the most widely reported bear attack stories in American history. The fact that an entire family had been killed in a single incident was unprecedented in modern wildlife management records. Dr. Patricia Rodriguez began conducting the autopsies on the Carter family members at 9:15 p.m. on June 14th, working through the night to complete the examinations before decomposition could compromise the evidence. Her findings would confirm that all 4 family members had died from massive trauma consistent with grizzly bear attack, with John and Melissa suffering the most extensive injuries due to their attempts to defend their children and themselves. John Carter's autopsy revealed 37 separate wounds, including deep lacerations, puncture wounds from the bear's canine teeth, and blunt force trauma from the animal's powerful paws. His cause of death was determined to be exsanguination from multiple wounds, with contributing factors including massive head trauma and damage to major blood vessels in his neck and chest. His blood alcohol level was 0, confirming that impairment played no role in the incident. Melissa Carter's examination showed 29 separate injuries, with the fatal wound being severe traumatic brain injury, sustained when she struck the stone fireplace during the bear's initial attack. Additional injuries included deep claw marks across her torso and defensive wounds on her arms and hands, where she had attempted to protect herself. Like her husband, toxicology tests showed no evidence of alcohol or drug impairment. Emily Carter's autopsy was particularly difficult for Dr. Rodriguez to perform due to the child's age and the extensive nature of her injuries. The 10-year-old had suffered massive blunt force trauma that had caused immediate unconsciousness and death, sparing her from prolonged suffering. The examination revealed that Emily had positioned herself between the bear and her younger brother, confirming witness accounts that she had tried to protect Ryan during their final moments. Ryan Carter's examination showed that the 7-year-old had died almost instantly from massive head trauma, indicating that his suffering had been minimal despite the horrific nature of the attack. His small body had been unable to withstand even a fraction of the force that a grizzly bear could exert, and Dr. Rodriguez concluded that he had lost consciousness immediately upon being struck by the animal. The completed autopsy reports were released to law enforcement and wildlife officials on June 16th, providing the official documentation needed for the investigation and any potential legal proceedings. Dr. Rodriguez's findings would serve as crucial evidence in determining whether any human factors had contributed to the tragedy and whether changes in wildlife management policies might prevent similar incidents in the future. Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks initiated a comprehensive investigation into the circumstances that had led to the fatal attack, examining everything from the bear's behavior patterns to the adequacy of warning systems for remote property owners. The investigation was led by Regional Wildlife Manager James Patterson, a 30-year veteran who had overseen hundreds of bear incidents throughout his career, but had never dealt with multiple fatalities in a single incident. The bear that had killed the Carter family was subjected to a complete necropsy by wildlife veterinarian Dr. Susan Martinez to determine if any medical conditions might have contributed to its unusually aggressive behavior. The examination revealed that the animal was in excellent physical condition with no signs of disease, injury, or starvation that might explain its territorial aggression. The bear's stomach contents included fish, berries, and vegetation typical of a normal grizzly diet, indicating it was not desperately seeking food when it attacked. Genetic samples taken from the bear were compared to DNA evidence collected from previous incidents in the area, confirming that this was the same animal that had been leaving sign around the Carter cabin for several weeks before the fatal encounter. The DNA analysis also revealed that the bear was approximately 12 years old, placing it in the prime of its physical capabilities and territorial behavior patterns. The investigation into human factors focused on whether the Carter family had followed proper bear safety protocols and whether they had received adequate warnings about the dangerous situation they were entering. Bob Mitchell's testimony about his attempts to warn the family was crucial in establishing that they had been informed of the risk but had chosen to remain at the cabin. despite the danger. Wildlife officials examined the cabin's food storage systems and found that the Carter family had followed proper procedures for securing their supplies in bear-proof containers. No evidence was found to suggest that the family had inadvertently attracted the bear through improper food handling or waste disposal. The attack appeared to be purely territorial in nature, with the bear viewing the humans as intruders in its claimed domain. The Carter cabin itself became evidence in the investigation as officials documented the extensive damage caused by the bear's territorial marking behavior in the days and weeks before the fatal attack. Claw marks, bite marks, and scent markings throughout the property told the story of an animal that had claimed the area as its exclusive territory and was prepared to defend it aggressively against any perceived threats. Local media coverage of the tragedy began with initial reports on June 15th, though details were limited due to the remote location and the ongoing investigation. The Kalispell Daily Interlake published the first comprehensive account of the incident on June 16th, followed by coverage in the Missoulian and other regional newspapers. The story quickly attracted attention from national media outlets due to the unprecedented nature of an entire family being killed in a single bear attack. Television news crews from Great Falls, Billings, and Spokane arrived in the Flathead Valley on June 17th to cover the story, though access to the actual attack site remained restricted due to the ongoing investigation. Reporters interviewed local residents, wildlife officials, and bear safety experts to provide context for what many were calling Montana's worst bear attack in recorded history. The tragedy sparked intense debate about wildlife management policies, bear hunting regulations, and the safety of remote recreational properties in grizzly bear habitat. Some advocates called for more aggressive bear control measures, while others argued that the incident was an isolated tragedy that didn't justify changes to existing wildlife protection policies. The debate would continue for months as officials worked to prevent similar incidents without compromising conservation efforts. Bob Mitchell became reluctantly involved in the media coverage as reporters sought to understand the warning signs that had preceded the attack and the attempts to alert the Carter family to the danger they faced. His interviews provided crucial context about the bear's behavior in the days before the incident and the challenges of communicating urgent safety information to remote property owners who might not fully appreciate the risks they faced. The Carter family's memorial service was held on June 22nd at Christ the King Catholic Church in Missoula, where John and Melissa had been married 12 years earlier. Over 800 people attended the service, including extended family members from across the country, friends from their Missoula community, colleagues from John's engineering firm and Melissa's hospital, and dozens of people who had never met the family but were moved by the tragedy to pay their respects. Father Michael O'Connell, who had baptized both Emily and Ryan, delivered the eulogy that focused on the family's love for each other and their shared passion for Montana's wilderness. He acknowledged the tragic irony that the natural world they cherished had ultimately claimed their lives, but emphasized that their deaths should not diminish appreciation for the beauty and value of wild places that had brought them so much joy during their lives together. The children's elementary school, Hawthorne Elementary, established the Carter Family Memorial Scholarship to honor Emily and Ryan's memory, while supporting other students who shared their interests in science and nature. The scholarship would provide funding for summer camps, educational trips, and equipment for students pursuing studies in biology, environmental science, and related fields. John's employer, Morrison Mayall Engineering, created a memorial fund to support wilderness safety education and bear awareness programs throughout Montana. The company's contributions would help fund research into bear behavior, safety training for outdoor recreationists, and improved warning systems for remote property owners who might encounter dangerous wildlife situations. Melissa's colleagues at Community Medical Center established a memorial fund focused on wilderness medicine and emergency response training for healthcare professionals who might be called upon to treat victims of wildlife attacks or other backcountry medical emergencies. The fund would support advanced training programs and equipment purchases for rural hospitals and emergency response teams. The Carter cabin became the subject of legal proceedings as insurance companies, attorneys, and government agencies worked to determine liability and compensation issues related to the tragedy. The property was eventually sold to Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, which demolished the building and returned the area to its natural state while designating it as a memorial to the family that had lost their lives there. Psychological counseling services were provided to the numerous emergency responders, investigators, and medical personnel who had been involved in the incident response. The traumatic nature of the scene and the fact that the victims included young children had created lasting emotional impacts on many of the professionals who had dealt with the aftermath of the attack. Dr. Marcus Thompson and Jake Rodriguez both requested transfers to different assignments following the incident, finding it difficult to continue their wildlife management careers after witnessing the worst-case scenario that all bear biologists feared might someday occur. Dr. Thompson eventually retired early from Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, while Jake Rodriguez moved to Wyoming, where he specialized in large carnivore research rather than direct wildlife management. Bob Mitchell struggled with survivors' guilt and depression following the tragedy, blaming himself for not doing more to prevent the Carter family from staying at their cabin despite the obvious danger. He sought counseling through Veterans Services and gradually worked through his emotional trauma, eventually becoming an advocate for improved communication systems between wildlife officials and remote property owners. The incident prompted legislative hearings in the Montana state capitol as lawmakers examined whether existing wildlife management policies were adequate to protect public safety while maintaining healthy bear populations. The hearings featured testimony from wildlife biologists, hunting guides, property owners, and bear attack survivors, creating a comprehensive record of the challenges involved in balancing conservation and safety concerns. New regulations were eventually implemented, requiring improved notification systems for dangerous wildlife situations, mandatory bear safety training for remote property owners, and enhanced funding for wildlife management programs focused on reducing human-bear conflicts. The changes were collectively known as the Carter Family Safety Act, in honor of the victims who had lost their lives in the attack. The grizzly bear population in the Flathead Valley was monitored intensively following the incident to determine whether the removal of the problem animal had restored normal behavior patterns among the remaining bears in the area. Wildlife biologists found that other bears in the region showed typical avoidance behaviors toward humans, suggesting that the aggressive territorial behavior had been specific to the individual animal that was killed. Research into grizzly bear territorial behavior was expanded following the incident, with scientists working to understand the factors that might cause individual animals to become aggressively territorial toward human habitation. The Carter case provided valuable data about extreme bear behavior, though researchers hoped that such information would never again be obtained at such a terrible cost in human lives. The remote location where the Carter cabin had stood was eventually designated as the Carter Family Memorial Wilderness Area, preserving the natural habitat that the family had loved while ensuring that their tragic deaths would be remembered and honored. The designation included funding for bear research and safety education programs that would help prevent similar tragedies in the future. Educational programs about bear safety and wilderness preparedness began incorporating lessons learned from the Carter family tragedy, using their story to illustrate the importance of heeding wildlife warnings and taking appropriate precautions when recreating in bear habitat. The programs emphasized that even experienced outdoors enthusiasts could find themselves in dangerous situations that required immediate evacuation rather than attempts to coexist with problem wildlife. The investigation's final report, released 6 months after the incident, concluded that the Carter family had been the victims of an extremely rare confluence of circumstances involving an unusually aggressive bear during peak territorial season in an area where late spring conditions had disrupted normal wildlife behavior patterns. The report found no fault with the family's actions, while acknowledging that earlier evacuation might have prevented the tragedy. The Carter family tragedy became a case study in wildlife management programs at universities across North America, providing students with a real-world example of the complex factors that can contribute to human-wildlife conflicts. The case highlighted the challenges of balancing public safety with wildlife conservation, while illustrating the unpredictable nature of individual animal behavior. 10 years after the incident, the site of the former Carter cabin remains a place of pilgrimage for wildlife professionals, outdoor enthusiasts, and family members who want to honor the memory of John, Melissa, Emily, and Ryan Carter. A simple granite marker in the meadow behind where their cabin once stood bears their names and the dates of their birth and death, along with the inscription, "They loved this wild place, and it was here they found eternal peace." The Carter family's love of wilderness and wildlife has been honored through the establishment of wildlife viewing areas, nature trails, and educational facilities that bear their name throughout Montana and beyond. Their tragic deaths served as a catalyst for improved safety measures and wildlife management policies that have undoubtedly prevented other families from experiencing similar tragedies in the years since their loss. The story of the Carter family serves as a sobering reminder that Montana's wilderness, while beautiful and spiritually rewarding, remains a place where humans are visitors in a world shaped by forces beyond their control. The grizzly bears that killed them continue to roam the forests and mountains of northwest Montana, magnificent predators whose very presence makes the wilderness complete, while demanding respect and caution from all who venture into their domain. The legacy of John, Melissa, Emily, and Ryan Carter lives on in the enhanced safety measures, research programs, and educational initiatives that have grown from the tragedy of their deaths. While their lives were cut short in the most horrific circumstances imaginable, their story continues to protect other families who share their love of Montana's wild places and their desire to experience the natural world in its most pristine and powerful form. In the end, the Carter family tragedy of June 14, 2024, stands as both a testament to the raw power of nature and a reminder of the precious fragility of human life. Their deaths were not in vain if they served to educate others about the realities of living and recreating in one of North America's last great wilderness areas where grizzly bears reign supreme, and humans must always remember that they are guests in an ancient and untamed world.